Arya Stark stood at the prow of a merchant ship bound for King's Landing, a salt-crusted wind whipping her dark hair about her face. She had grown lean from years of training and wandering, her body tempered by an unforgiving world. The morning sun cast the sea in trembling shards of gold, and yet she felt none of the warmth that tried to brush her cheeks. How many times had she been on a ship like this? Crossing the narrow sea, fleeing from or returning to a home that had never truly felt like home since the day her family was shattered. Each journey had changed her. This time, she came not as a lost girl seeking a place in a world that spurned her, but as a quiet storm of skill and resolve. She no longer bore the name No One, nor was she simply Arya underfoot. She was Arya Stark of Winterfell, and she had been summoned. She had received a curious letter while in Braavos, training with the last remnants of her knowledge gleaned from the House of Black and White. The letter arrived sealed with a sigil half familiar and half new, a stag crowned in gold but with a subtle difference from the old Baratheon crest. It came from King Gendry Baratheon, the legitimized bastard who had claimed the Iron Throne after the wars and collapses that racked Westeros. Gendry had asked for her presence in King's Landing, no demands, only a respectful request and a vow that her safety would be guaranteed. And so she'd come, out of curiosity, out of duty, and perhaps out of a faint ember of friendship she once shared with Gendry. She wondered what the boy she had known in the Riverlands, the lad with the bull's helm and smudged cheeks, had become now that he sat on the Iron Throne. As the merchant ship pulled into Blackwater Bay, Arya took her first long, measuring look at the city that had, in so many ways, shaped her fate. King's Landing rose before her, as filthy and crowded as she remembered, the Red Keep perched upon its promontory like some great red beast. Smoke curled from countless chimneys and the stench of waste mingled with salt air. She wrinkled her nose at the smell that used to nauseate her as a child. Now she felt only a faint echo of that revulsion, for her experiences had hardened her against all but the worst horrors. The city was alive, whatever else one might say of it. King's Landing pulsed with life, with ambition, with intrigue. If the darkest pits of human nature thrived here, so did the bright flames of resilience and cunning. Her arrival on the docks was unceremonious. No silver trumpets, no retinue of gold-cloaked guards. That was precisely how she wanted it. She disembarked, her pack slung over her shoulder, a battered cloak concealing her leather jerkin. The sword at her hip was thin, elegant, a shape reminiscent of needle, though she carried her old friend in a well-hidden sheath across her back. A new blade of Valyrian steel, earned through a daring contract during her Braavos days, now served as her open companion. She had many secrets and many masks, but if Gendry truly desired her presence, he would know the truth soon enough. A pair of gold cloaks stood near the dock's edge, scanning the new arrivals. One guard, a rangy, hawk-nosed fellow, took a bored look at Arya until his gaze fell upon the seal pinned discreetly to her cloak, the stag. He perked up and inclined his head. You're the one King Gendry sent for?" She simply nodded, saying nothing. Wordlessly, the man beckoned her, and she followed him along the winding streets of Flea Bottom, through the chaotic press of market stalls, past the great September that was still under reconstruction, and up toward the Red Keep. She felt as though she was retracing old steps, a ghost haunting the labyrinth of her past. She almost expected to see faces from her childhood peering out from alleyways, her father, her sister, hot pies cooking in taverns. Ghosts, all of them. Some living, many dead. But she pressed on. When at last she reached the Red Keep's grand courtyard, she saw the changed banners, the crowned stag of Gendry Baratheon, black on gold, draped over crimson stone. It replaced the red and gold lions of House Lannister and the silver and black Targaryen sigils that had fluttered in short-lived triumph after Daenerys's brief reign. The courtyard was busy with stable hands, knights, and courtiers who parted as the gold cloak escorted Arya to a set of tall, ornate doors. He left her with a curt bow in the presence of 2 Kingsguard knights in pristine white cloaks. Those knights opened the doors without question, revealing an antechamber that led into the throne room. She stepped inside and saw Gendry at the far end, sitting the Iron Throne. Even from a distance, she recognized the broad shoulders, the black hair. He was speaking quietly with an advisor, a silver-haired woman who kept glancing down at notes in her hands. The steel swords of the Iron Throne, melted, twisted, and hammered into a brutal seat, glinted in the torchlight. Memories of her father's beheading flashed across Arya's mind, and for a moment her heart clenched. The ghosts that lurked in this hall were more formidable than any she might encounter outside. Gendry finished his conversation and dismissed the advisor. His gaze swept the length of the throne room until he saw Arya standing alone. He blinked. His face broke into a slow, stunned smile, as if the memory of that spunky, scrappy girl he had once known suddenly materialized before him. He rose, stepping carefully down the dais, the polished steel crown on his head reflecting the flames of the torches. Up close, Arya saw the changes in him, the set of his jaw, the lines around his eyes that spoke of burdens and duty. He was no longer the smudged apprentice of Tobomot's forge, but a king who carried the weight of a realm on his shoulders. They stood face to face. Neither bowed, neither spoke until Gendry said in a voice both awkward and heartfelt, "Arya." Arya gave a small nod. "Your Grace," she said, her tone careful, though a shadow of a smile teased at the corner of her mouth. He let out a breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "I'm not used to that. I'm glad you came. I was curious why you asked." He gestured for her to follow him to a side room, a modest solar adjacent to the throne room. The Kingsguard knights at the door stepped aside, and she followed Gendry in. A table stood in the center with maps and scrolls scattered about. He closed the door behind her, his hands tense at his sides. "I asked because the realm needs stability," he said, speaking in earnest. "And I need people I can trust, people I know aren't scheming behind my back, people who aren't in it for themselves." His gaze flicked to hers, sincere and open. "You helped me once, or tried to, even when we were practically children. We've been through a lot since. I'd be an idiot not to want you in my service if you'd have it." She narrowed her eyes, scanning his face for any sign of hidden motives. "You want a spy master? An assassin?" He shook his head quickly, seeming almost embarrassed by the suggestion. "No, not that. I have spies and whisperers enough. I want—" He hesitated, then composed himself. "I want you in the Kingsguard." Arya raised an eyebrow, a subtle but unmistakable motion of surprise. "The Kingsguard," she repeated. "You know the vows they take? To serve for life, to have no family, no holdings, no ties? Is that what you think I want?" She tried to keep her voice neutral, but the old Arya, the one who chafed at any constraint, stirred restlessly. "Yes," he said simply, "because I think you crave a higher purpose, something that matters in this broken realm. And perhaps I also think you might not mind being close to the throne if it means ensuring no more injustices happen like the ones we both saw. I'm asking as a friend, but also as a king." Arya said nothing for a long moment. Thoughts collided in her mind. Her childhood dream of knighthood that had once flickered when she was a little girl, so overshadowed by the brutal reality of her life. The notion of being a white cloak in service to a king, to one of the few men who had never betrayed her trust. She imagined standing guard in the Red Keep, her vow unbroken, her purpose defined. She also imagined the open road, the thrill of forging her own path, free as the wind. Yet, for all her wanderlust, there was an ache in her chest, a desire for something that might root her in a place she cared about. Even if King's Landing itself held bitter memories, the realm still had people she loved in it. Her sister, perhaps her brother. She wanted them safe. She wanted a future better than the past. "I'll consider it," she said at last. "But I make no promises." Gendry smiled, relief evident in his eyes. "That's all I ask." In the following days, Arya resided in the Red Keep in a modest set of chambers near the knights' barracks. She kept her presence quiet, spending time observing the city. She walked through the streets cloaked, face hidden, slipping in and out of taverns. She listened for rumors about the king, about potential threats. She had lost the naive illusions of childhood, and even though Gendry seemed earnest, she knew that being a ruler in Westeros involved navigating a viper's nest of ambitious lords, resentful bannermen, and foreign opportunists. Any or all of them could harbor designs to remove a Baratheon king. She tested her old abilities, seeing if the instincts from her faceless man training had dulled. They had not. She moved unnoticed, melting into the bustle, picking up scraps of gossip in a dozen tongues. One evening, as she returned to the Red Keep, one of the King's Guard, a stern-faced knight named Ser Wolbracken, approached her. He wore the pristine white cloak draped over gilded armor and had a slight limp. His eyes, beneath bushy brows, were dark as he scrutinized her. "You're the northern girl the king spoke of?" She only nodded. Serwell glanced at her sword, at her lean frame. "He's told us you may be joining our ranks. I've never known the King's Guard to take a woman. Not in living memory." Arya said nothing. It was not hostility she heard in his voice, but caution. He pursed his lips as if making a decision. If His Grace wishes it, that's the end of it. But if you do join, I'd like to see your medal. We're a small brotherhood in arms, sworn to protect the king. We can't abide weakness. His tone was formal, but she could sense curiosity simmering beneath. I'd be happy to show you I'm not weak, she replied softly. If you need proof. He studied her a moment longer and then nodded once. Tomorrow at dawn, in the courtyard. I'll see how you hold a blade. That night, Arya lay awake in her small chamber, staring at the flickering shadows the candle cast against the stone walls. She remembered the swirl of a practice yard in Winterfell, her father's watchful eyes on her as she learned archery and sparred with wooden swords. She remembered Syrio Farrell in King's Landing, the dancing master who had taught her that quickness and wit could triumph over brute force. She remembered the hound, fierce and frightening, yet in some twisted sense, a strange sort of protector for a time. Her life had been shaped by swords and teachers, and each lesson had been forged in blood and loss. If Serwell wanted to see her medal, he would see it. The next morning dawned pale and brisk. In the Red Keep's training yard, a handful of squires groomed horses while knights milled about talking in low voices. Serwell stood in the center, waiting. A few other Kingsguard knights were present, their white cloaks catching the early light. She recognized Ser Edric Dane, who bore the famous name but not the famed sword Dawn, though rumor said it remained in Starfall until a sword of the morning worthy of it should arise. Nonetheless, Ser Edric was reputed to be a skilled swordsman. Watching from a distance was Gendry himself, dressed in plain garb, his crown absent, though everyone around him recognized the king. No ceremony accompanied his presence here. This was a private test. A test of skill, yes, but also of whether Arya Stark of Winterfell could fit into an ancient order built on tradition. She stepped forward in fitted leathers, her dark hair braided back from her face. A real sword at her hip gleamed. The men whispered among themselves, uncertain. A few seemed curious, a couple looked disdainful, but most were guarded. Serwell inclined his head and gestured to a rack of blunted steel swords used for sparring. Choose one, if you will. Arya paused, then shook her head. I'd prefer to use my own. Serwell's brow furrowed. We usually use practice swords. It won't be a fair test, Arya replied. My blade is lighter and I've trained with that weight. I'll dull the edge. We needn't draw blood. A small smile tugged at the knight's lips. All right? No kills, no crippling, but no gentle taps either. Understood. Arya nodded, drawing her slender Valyrian steel sword. She ran it once across a whetstone that had been dipped in thick oil, removing the razor sharpness but leaving enough edge to feel the sting. Everyone watched in expectant silence. Gendry took a step closer, arms folded, as Serwell drew his own sword, a heavier longsword. They circled each other. Arya felt her limbs loose, her breath calm, eyes fixed on her opponent. Serwell was bigger, older, likely slower, but he had the experience of countless battles. She saw the subtle shift in his stance before he lunged forward, feinting left. She recognized the trick. Her feet slid across the packed dirt as she pivoted, letting his slash pass within inches. His blade whistled in the cold morning air. She answered with a quick thrust, which he parried at the last moment. Metal clanged, the echo snapped around the yard. For several moments, they tested each other, thrust, parry, slash, dodge. Arya's footwork, reminiscent of Braavosi water dancers, let her evade Serwell's heavier blows. She watched the shift of his shoulders and hips to predict his next move. He, in turn, pressed her, using his reach advantage to keep her from simply dancing away. Sweat trickled down her neck as their blades collided again. She gave ground, letting him follow, and then twisted her wrist in a maneuver designed to disarm him. He countered, blocking her move, though she saw the flicker of respect in his eyes. The onlookers murmured. The ring of steel continued until Serwell, breathing harder now, attempted a bold overhead strike. Arya stepped aside in a swirl of movement, hooking the crossguard of her sword behind his wrist, turning his momentum against him. With a deft twist, she forced him to drop to one knee to keep his grip. She might have struck him in the back of the head if this were a true fight, but she merely pressed the dulled blade lightly against his shoulder pauldron. It was a demonstration of her advantage. She released him quickly and jumped back, letting him rise. His breath came in harsh bursts. He looked at her, and a faint grin broke across his stern features. He raised his sword in salute. Enough, he said quietly, his voice threaded with acceptance. I've seen all I need to see. When he sheathed his sword, the other Kingsguard knights began to clap, some politely, others with genuine enthusiasm. Gendry stepped forward, a grin spreading across his face. For a moment, Arya caught a glimpse of the boy at the forge, proud of something he helped shape. He nodded to her, but said nothing. The men parted to let him approach Serwell and Arya. Serwell inclined his head to the king. Your Grace, if the Lady Arya truly wishes to join our order, I see no fault in her skill. Gendry looked at Arya, his gaze warm. Will you accept the white cloak? She paused, feeling the hush envelop the courtyard. This was the moment. The child in her who once dreamed of knighthood warred with the free spirit who wanted to roam the world. But she remembered all she had lost and all Westeros had lost to men who seized power for themselves. She remembered the nights she had prayed for vengeance and the emptiness vengeance left behind. Maybe Serwell was right. Maybe tradition needed to change, just like everything else in the realm. And perhaps she could make certain that no more children would lose their families the way she had. With a slow breath, she nodded. I will. Gendry let out a small breath, relief and triumph in his eyes. Then let all in this courtyard bear witness. Arya Stark of House Stark, you are to be inducted into the Kingsguard, with all the rights, duties, and sacrifices that entails. No formal ceremony occurred that instant. Gendry instructed them to prepare the official induction on the morrow. But the hush of acceptance washed over them, and Arya, for the first time in a long time, felt something tighten in her throat. Serwell offered her his hand and she took it, albeit briefly. Around them, curious onlookers from the rest of the Red Keep's retinue began to gather, whispering of the first woman in the Kingsguard in living memory, and a Stark at that. That evening, in her chamber, Arya received her official Kingsguard raiment, a bright white cloak, plain but solemn, along with a fitted white surcoat. She ran her fingers over the fabric. It felt strange, alien even. But she placed the cloak around her shoulders, looking in the mirror. She didn't quite recognize the woman gazing back. Perhaps that was fitting. She had been so many people, the highborn daughter, the fugitive, the assassin, the wanderer. Now she would be something else entirely. The next morning's induction took place in the throne room before a small audience of lords, ladies, and knights. Arya stood in her new white cloak, her sword belted at her side. Gendry stood before the Iron Throne, crown on his brow. The herald read the oath of the Kingsguard aloud, and though tradition said each new member should repeat the words, Gendry spoke quietly. Say it as it's written, or say it how you will. The vow matters, not the pageantry. Arya said the vows in a soft, steady voice. She promised to protect the king and the royal family, to hold no land, to father or mother no children, to serve for life. She paused when she reached the part about having no family, feeling a pang for her siblings, scattered or grown. But she swallowed it down and pressed on. She could not truly forsake her family in her heart. No vow could change that. Yet the formality bound her to the king's service. When the vow was complete, Gendry set his swords flat on her shoulder, then lifted it away. Rise, Ser Arya, shield of the king. A stirring of murmurs swept the hall at the unexpected Ser. But Gendry's voice brooked no disagreement, and when Arya stood, she accepted the slight rewriting of tradition. She was used to forging her own path. Over the next weeks, Arya settled into the daily life of the Kingsguard. She learned the watch rotations, the protocols for guarding the royal family, and the labyrinth that was the Red Keep's politics. Though Gendry was king, the realm was far from tranquil. Lords from the Stormlands supported him fervently, but the Crownlands were riddled with opportunistic houses who had once backed the Targaryens or Lannisters. The North was all but independent under Queen Sansa in Winterfell, forging peaceful ties with Gendry but maintaining its distance. Dorne simmered with its own brand of grudges, and the Iron Islands were a question mark, as always. Arya listened more than she spoke. People often assumed she was just a quiet, stoic guard standing near the throne, or by Gendry's side in council meetings. But in her silence, she learned more than they realized. Her training and her experiences made her an excellent observer. She noticed how certain lords flinched at the mention of new taxes to rebuild King's Landing. She saw how some knights tensed whenever Gendry mentioned forging alliances rather than continuing old conflicts. She noticed the small flickers in posture or expression that hinted at deeper ambitions. The realm was fragile, held together by Gendry's unexpected claim and the war-weary exhaustion of the nobles. She also understood that a single spark could break it all apart. Meanwhile, she tested the boundaries of her vow. Occasionally, she roamed the city in disguise, adopting a face she kept locked in her trunk for such missions. She sought to confirm rumors that a certain faction among the Crownlands might be plotting to remove Gendry and install someone with a more direct Targaryen line, some rumored descendant or false claimant. She frequented taverns where sellswords and minor courtiers spoke too freely. Bit by bit, she constructed a web of suspicions. One name began to surface more often than others, Lord Orys Waters, a nobleman of uncertain parentage who claimed distant ties to House Valerion. He had grown rich through shipping lanes, apparently. He had financed reconstruction efforts in King's Landing, earning the king's favor. But now she heard whispers that he was rallying supporters under Gendry's very nose, promising them a return to the rightful bloodline. Arya kept her ears open and her sword close. In her new duties, Arya also found surprising camaraderie within the Kingsguard. Ser Bracken, once stern, had warmed up to her. He admired her skill and discovered that she was easy to train with, as she didn't hold arrogance or illusions of invincibility. Ser Edric Dane, not much older than Arya herself, displayed a shy respect for the stories he'd heard of her father, Eddard Stark, and Jon Snow. Another was a hulking warrior from the Reach, Ser Alan Graceford, who teased Arya about her size until she soundly beat him in a friendly bout, after which he recognized her as a kindred spirit of martial skill. Bit by bit, Arya found acceptance in the small brotherhood, forging a path no woman had trod since perhaps the days of the Kingsguard under Rhaenys Targaryen, if even then. Her presence also drew the notice of the court. Some lords scorned the idea of a northern girl-turned-assassin wearing the white cloak. Others praised the king's progressive thinking. And a smaller subset eyed Arya like a threat, seeing her as Gendry's personal blade, unstoppable and silent. The conflicting perceptions played into the delicate balance of power. Late one afternoon, while guarding the door to the Royal Solar, Arya overheard a conversation between Gendry and his Master of Whispers, a clever man named Ryam Hill. They discussed a potential alliance with Dorne, a marriage perhaps to mend old rifts. Gendry was uncertain, muttering that he did not want to wed merely for politics. But the Master of Whispers reminded him that the realm needed alliances. Arya listened, her mind drifting. She wondered if Gendry remembered the nights they spent traveling together in the Riverlands, both too young to fully grasp the scale of the war around them. She saw how duty now weighed on him like a chain of iron. If he must marry to secure the realm, he would do it, though it might pain him. As her watch ended, Gendry emerged, looking exhausted. He gave her a small nod. "Walk with me," he said, and she fell into step beside him as they left the Solar and wound through the corridors of the Red Keep. He led her outside onto a secluded balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. There, the afternoon sun cast the choppy waves in shining gold. Gendry leaned on the rail, sighing. "It's never simple, is it?" he said quietly, glancing at her. Arya studied him, crossing her arms. "When was it ever?" He huffed a laugh. "I remember simpler times, though I suppose they weren't so simple. You were there. It was a childhood illusion, maybe." He hesitated. "You're well? The Kingsguard isn't chafing you." "I'm fine," she said, but she felt a complicated surge in her chest. "I'm doing what I can to keep you alive. I suppose that's enough purpose for me right now." He nodded and turned his gaze back to the water. "I'm sorry you have to do this for me, to give up your freedom. Maybe we're all just trapped in one way or another. But you should know you're free to leave any time. I won't hold you to a vow you don't want." Arya's jaw tightened. She knew Gendry meant well. But a vow was a vow, and she had never once abandoned a commitment she'd chosen, no matter the cost. "I won't leave," she said firmly. "Not while you still need me." She surprised herself with the intensity of her words, but they rang true. She'd seen too many betrayals, too much false loyalty. If she swore this oath, she would see it through. That was the only way it had meaning. Before Gendry could respond, a page hurried onto the balcony, out of breath. "Your Grace, Ser Arya, Lord Orys Waters requests an audience. He says it's urgent." Gendry pushed off the rail, exchanging a glance with Arya. "Let's see what he wants," he said. They both followed the page. Lord Orys Waters waited in the throne room, dressed in finely cut garments of dark teal embroidered with silver. His face was pleasant enough, with refined features and silver-threaded hair that hinted at some Valyrian heritage. He made a low bow to Gendry. "Your Grace, I bring you news from the Crownlands regarding certain troubles on the roads to Duskendale." As they discussed the matter, Orys outlined how brigands had been attacking merchant caravans, destabilizing trade. He offered his personal fleet of ships to help guard the sea route. Gendry thanked him for the offer, but Arya watched Orys' eyes. They flicked to her once, with a hint of curiosity or perhaps resentment. He then returned his focus to Gendry, painting a vivid picture of roving outlaws. Arya had seen such men before, the remnants of the war who had found no place in the new order. She suspected there was more to the story. The way Orys spoke, it felt rehearsed, like a performance. Gendry, still new to the intrigues of court, seemed genuinely grateful, promising that the crown would support Orys' efforts to keep the roads and seas safe. When the audience concluded, Oris bowed again and retreated, but not before lingering a moment to give Arya a polite, if chilling, smile. When he left, Gendry muttered, "He's been helpful to me, especially financially. But I can't get a proper read on him. My advisors say I should be wary of men who are too helpful." Arya nodded. "A wise sentiment. I'll keep an eye on him, if you like." Gendry pressed his lips together. "Yes. Please do. I can't afford to misjudge him." Over the next weeks, Arya did just that. Through quiet observation and secret forays into the city, she noted Oris' comings and goings. Sometimes he'd meet with minor lords or wealthy merchants in his lavish manse. Other times he'd disappear for nights at a time, traveling up the river with a small retinue. Arya grew suspicious that these brigand attacks might be orchestrated by Oris' men, stirring fear so he could swoop in as a savior. More worrisome still, rumors persisted that Oris claimed some distant Targaryen link and that if he could find a way to prove it or marry someone in that line, he might press a claim for the throne. She quietly collected bits of evidence, but none conclusive enough to accuse him outright. She had to be certain. Meanwhile, Gendry faced pressure from the small council to solidify alliances, including the marriage to a Dornish princess. Negotiations dragged, with letters flying back and forth to Sunspear. Tensions simmered in the city as taxes rose to pay for the repair of the damage from the past conflicts. Soldiers grumbled about late pay. The faithful complained about blasphemies. Every day Arya stood guard, listening to the swirl of discontent. She felt the precariousness of it all, the sense that one well-placed dagger, one spark of rebellion, could unravel everything. One night, while standing guard near the royal chambers, Arya heard voices raised in argument from inside Gendry's solar. She recognized the king's voice and the master of whispers, Ryam Hill. Softly, she leaned closer, hearing snatches of conversation. "Dorne is growing restless, no sign of compromise, and reports that Oris Waters has approached envoys from Pentos, and your grace, you must see that he's a threat." Arya's grip tightened on the hilt of her sword. She already suspected Oris was forging connections across the sea, possibly to gather Sellswords. If it was true, he might be preparing for a coup. She needed more than rumor, though. She needed solid proof. As the voices quieted, she stepped back, returning to her motionless stance by the door. The following dawn, Arya took leave to ride out of the city for a day. Officially, she was investigating the brigand attacks reported on the Rosby Road. In truth, she was following a lead that Oris often visited a remote villa near a small fishing village north of King's Landing. She wore a plain cloak and carried minimal gear. 2 other members of the Kingsguard offered to join her, but she demurred, claiming she would move more swiftly alone. She had no illusions about the dangers, but secrecy was paramount. The journey was uneventful at first. She rode a dappled mare along dusty roads, passing farmers' wagons and the occasional group of Sellswords seeking employment in the capital. She kept her head down, her senses alert. By midday, she neared the small fishing village. She tied her mare in a thicket and proceeded on foot. She moved through the trees with the silent ease taught to her by the faceless men. Before long, she spotted a villa perched on a low cliff above the sea. It was modest but well-maintained, with a small courtyard and a stable. No banners flew, but a guard in chainmail lounged at the gate. A second guard appeared near the stables, leading a well-bred horse. She recognized the horse's silver crest as a personal emblem favored by Oris' retinue. Heart-pounding, Arya made her way closer, creeping through scrub and tall grass until she found a vantage point behind a half-crumbling stone wall. From there, she could see the courtyard. Oris Waters stood in conversation with a pair of men dressed in fine silk garments that marked them as foreign merchants or envoys. They spoke in low voices, but she could catch a few words: ships in the narrow sea, cost, gold from the mines, enough to confirm something shady was unfolding. Oris gestured to a chest that one of his servants opened, revealing gleaming gold. The foreign envoys exchanged satisfied looks. Clearly, Oris was funding something significant. A moment later, a third figure emerged from the villa, a tall man with sun-kissed skin and a braided silver-blonde queue. He carried a sword at his hip, and his accent when he spoke was thick with SOC vowels. He said something about Sellswords from the Golden Company and legitimate Targaryen claim. Arya's blood chilled. The Golden Company had a storied history of supporting Targaryen pretenders. If Oris was trying to hire them, or had already done so, that spelled grave danger for Gendry's throne. She crouched low, straining to hear more. If your king cannot keep the realm stable, the people will cry out for a return of the blood of old Valyria, the silver-haired man said. Oris nodded gravely, though there was a triumphant gleam in his eyes. I have the necessary proof of my lineage, he declared, and soon all will see that I am the rightful heir. The bastard blacksmith can rule no longer. Arya felt a surge of fury. She had half a mind to charge in and take Ori's head. But she knew better. She was outnumbered and it was crucial she bring word to Gendry along with any evidence she could gather. She carefully slipped back from the wall, making her way toward the stables. If she could just see what horses or banners they bore, perhaps she could identify the men for certain. As she approached the stables, her heart hammered. One guard patrolled near the stable door. He turned and Arya pressed herself flat against the side of the building. When his footsteps receded, she slipped inside. She found a few horses that carried distinctive saddlebags with foreign markings. She quickly rifled through one bag, finding a small parchment with a wax seal she didn't recognize, an intricate dragon-like design. She stashed it in her own belt pouch. Then, footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. She froze. The guard was returning. She pressed herself into the shadows behind the tallest horse, silently praying it would not stir. The guard stepped into the stable, muttering to himself. He came closer, his boots just inches from where Arya crouched. The horse snorted, shifting slightly. Arya clenched her jaw. The guard paused, suspicious. She heard the rasp of a blade leaving its sheath. The next moment, the horse shifted again, perhaps smelling her presence. The guard leaned forward. Just as he was about to peer behind the horse, Arya sprang. In a flash, she had a dagger pressed against his neck, her other hand clamped over his mouth. She gave him no chance to cry out. With a single, swift move, she ended his life. He slumped, and she eased his body down quietly, breath ragged. She hated killing in cold blood, but she told herself it was necessary. She couldn't let him raise an alarm. She slid out of the stable, careful to avoid the courtyard where Orys and the others were finishing their business. Sticking to the treeline, she made her way back to her mare. Mounting swiftly, she turned back toward King's Landing at a gallop, her cloak snapping in the wind. The parchment in her belt felt heavy as lead. She had the proof she needed. Orys Waters was plotting treason, planning to ally with foreigners to dethrone Gendry. She prayed she wasn't too late. When she reached the city after nightfall, sweaty and exhausted, she rode straight to the Red Keep. Bypassing the stable hands, she went directly to Gendry's solar. He was reviewing documents with his Master of Whispers, eyes bloodshot. When Arya burst in, hair disheveled and cloak splattered with mud, they looked up in alarm. Arya, what? She strode forward, tossing the parchment onto the table. Orys Waters is a traitor. He's hiring sellswords from Essos from the Golden Company perhaps and forging alliances with Targaryen loyalists. He plans to overthrow you. Gendry paled, snatching up the parchment. Ryam Hill read over his shoulder, face growing grim. Gods, Gendry muttered. He's been right here in the city, smiling at me, feigning loyalty. And the proof is in our hands now. Arya nodded, her voice grim. We must move quickly. He may already have men in place. Within the hour, the Red Keep buzzed with alarm. Gendry convened a midnight council. Trusted knights and lords pored over the evidence. Word was sent to secure all city gates and to detain Orys if he tried to enter or leave King's Landing. But Orys had not returned to the city yet. Spies reported that he might be mustering men on the roads north of the capital. Gendry turned to Arya. I'll need you to lead a small contingent to take him into custody, or, if he resists, to end the threat for good. Can I trust you to do this, Sir Arya? Arya bowed her head. You can. She rode out at dawn with 24 gold cloaks and 4 of her fellow Kingsguard, all loyal men. They followed the main road north. Along the way, they encountered terrified villagers who spoke of armed riders passing through at night, extorting goods and food. Arya quickened the pace. By midday, they reached a crossroads where Orys' retinue was rumored to be camped. They found signs of fresh horse tracks leading off the main road into a wooded area. Cautiously, they advanced. Through the trees, they saw tents pitched in a small clearing. Guards patrolled with crossbows slung across their backs. Her gold-cloaked commander gestured for silence. Arya edged forward on foot, peering through the foliage. She recognized Orys' banner, an unofficial sigil, silver on teal, lacking any approval from the crown. She also saw a handful of men wearing half-concealed emblems of the Golden Company. Her blood simmered. They planned their approach. Arya would lead a flanking maneuver while the gold cloaks formed a defensive line on the main path. With signals exchanged by hand, they advanced. The guards at the camp's perimeter noticed them too late. A cry went up and chaos erupted as swords clashed, horses neighed, and men shouted. Arya led her fellow Kingsguard into the fray, cutting through Orys' guards with lethal efficiency. She sought Orys himself, eager to end the rebellion at its source. Orys emerged from a grand tent in partial armor, fury and panic in his eyes. He saw the king's men bearing down. Traitors, he bellowed, though the irony was staggering. He tried to mount a horse, but Arya slipped in front of him, her sword raised. He stopped short, recognition flashing across his face. You, he hissed. The she-wolf of the north. Arya leveled her blade. You're under arrest for treason against the crown. Surrender. He drew his sword, a gleaming piece of castle-forged steel. I do nothing of the sort. You stand in the way of the true bloodline. I'll see you dead and that bastard on the throne with you. Arya didn't wait for further words. She attacked, swift and low, forcing him to parry awkwardly. He was strong, younger than she expected, his moves not unskilled. But he couldn't match her agility. She slipped past his guard, landing a shallow cut across his side. He hissed and retaliated, nearly catching her with a slash that grazed her cloak. Sparks flew as their swords met. Around them, the camp was a melee of shouts and steel. Smoke rose where tents caught fire. Shrieks of wounded men filled the air. Orys lunged again, but Arya sidestepped, hooking her foot behind his ankle and sending him stumbling. She advanced, pressing him. He fought back viciously, hacking at her with desperation, but she recognized his fear. He was a cornered animal. Another feint, another fluid movement, and she slammed the pommel of her sword into his face. He staggered, blood spurting from his nose. She could have ended him then, but she needed him alive if possible to face judgment and possibly reveal his co-conspirators. She aimed a precise strike at his sword arm, disarming him with a painful twist. He dropped to one knee, gasping, his eyes wild. Arya pressed her blade to his throat. Yield, she demanded. Face contorted in rage, Orys spat blood at her feet. I yield, he rasped, but the hatred in his eyes remained undimmed. The battle around them subsided quickly as the gold cloaks and Kingsguard overpowered the traitors. Some of Orys' men lay dead or dying while the rest surrendered. The scattered Sellsword captains realized they stood no chance and dropped their weapons. Arya kept Orys pinned until a pair of gold cloaks seized him in manacles. She stepped back, breathing hard, blood trickling down her forearm where a stray slash had caught her. We'll bring him to Gendry for trial, she said, her voice carrying the calm of command. The soldiers saluted. They returned to King's Landing in grim triumph, towing wagons of captured weapons and the wounded. Word spread quickly that Arya Stark and the Kingsguard had crushed a major threat to the king. Crowds gathered to watch Orys Waters, bound and disheveled, dragged through the city gates. Some jeered, others watched in fear or disbelief. At the Red Keep, Gendry awaited them in the courtyard. He locked eyes with Arya, relief flooding his fetu. Residential when he saw she was alive and more or less unhurt. He stepped forward as the gold cloaks forced Orys to kneel. The traitor glared up at Gendry. You'll pay for this, he spat. You have no right to that throne. Gendry clenched his jaw. You will face a trial. But your fate is all but sealed. Guards, take him to the black cells. Orys was dragged away, cursing. Arya dismounted, handing her reins to a stable boy. She went to Gendry, exhaustion weighing on her. He searched her face, 1,000 words unspoken in his eyes. Finally, he said, Thank you, Arya. You saved my life and the realm. Arya shook her head. I'm only doing my duty. He caught her arm gently. Your duty, yes. But you've gone above and beyond. I owe you a debt I can never repay. She felt her cheeks flush. You repay it by being a good king, she said softly. That's all I ask. In the days that followed, Orys Waters was tried for treason before a hastily assembled court of lords and the small council. Evidence gathered by Arya and others left little doubt of his guilt, the parchment from Essos, testimonies from captured Sellswords, and even some of his own men turning witness in exchange for leniency. Orys raged about his Valyrian blood and demanded the realm's support for a true heir, but no one listened. He was sentenced to death by beheading. Gendry offered Arya the dubious honor of carrying out the sentence, but she shook her head, memories of her own father's death in that very courtyard too fresh. She had no wish to mimic the headsman's sword. Instead, Serwal carried out the execution, and with that, the immediate threat of rebellion faded. The realm took a collective breath. Gendry began to focus on governance once again, forging trade agreements, negotiating new alliances. The city's reconstruction progressed, albeit slowly. As for Arya, her reputation soared. Some whispered that she was the king's unofficial spymaster, while others called her the deadliest sword in the realm. She tried to ignore the rumors and focus on her vow. She stood guard at Gendry's side during audiences, accompanied him to the small council, and even offered her perspective when the king asked for it. Though she rarely spoke publicly, her quiet presence had weight. And for the first time since leaving Winterfell all those years ago, she felt a sense of belonging, of serving a cause that mattered. Still, she couldn't help but wonder how long she would remain content. The open road called to her sometimes, whispers of adventure beyond the horizon. But for now she stayed. Perhaps the north would always be her true home and the memory of her siblings would tug at her heart. But for the moment King's Landing needed her, and a vow was a vow. One evening, under a sky blazing with sunset colors, Arya patrolled the ramparts of the Red Keep. The wind tugged at her white cloak, reminding her of the swirling snows of Winterfell. She gazed out over the city, thinking of how she had once been a frightened girl, scurrying through these alleys, a needle-clutched child witnessing horrors. Now she was a knight of the Kingsguard, sworn sword to the crown, forging a new path for Westeros. The city below still stank, still teemed with crime and cruelty, but perhaps, under Gendry's rule, it could become something better. Her reverie was broken when she heard footfalls behind her. She turned to see Gendry approaching, wearing no crown, just a simple tunic and breeches. He often walked the ramparts in the evening to clear his head. His eyes lit with a small smile when he saw her. For a moment neither spoke. They simply stood side by side, looking down at the sprawl of King's Landing beneath the sunset glow. "Will you stay?" he asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "You've given so much already. I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to go north or across the sea. Anywhere." Arya was quiet for a moment. Then she turned, resting her forearms on the cold stone of the battlements. "I have a duty. I'll stay as long as I'm needed." Gendry nodded, seeming to accept that. "I suppose we both bear burdens we never asked for," he said. "But we carry them anyway." She glanced at him. "Because that's who we are." They stood in silence again, the sun dipping below the horizon, bathing them in a last wash of warm light. Arya's heart felt strangely full, and for an instant she allowed herself to feel pride in what she had become, not a lady, not a faceless assassin, but a knight in white, forging a new chapter in a realm that was still healing. If she could play some small part in shaping a better future for Westeros, one where families weren't shattered by cruelty and betrayal, then her vow was well worth it. The next morning, she resumed her duties as if nothing had changed, though something in her had settled. Ser Arya Stark of the Kingsguard took her station by the throne, her keen eyes scanning the hall. Every so often, her gaze flicked to Gendry, King Gendry Baratheon, and she felt the quiet assurance that this was where she was meant to be. The ghosts of her past lingered, but they did not rule her. She had found purpose in protecting a king who cared for his people, a friend whose life she valued, and a realm that still bore the scars of war. Word spread throughout Westeros of Arya Stark's position in the Kingsguard. Lords and ladies reacted with surprise, curiosity, or approval. Some bards sang of the Wolf of the White Cloak, weaving tales of her fierce bravery. Other rumors suggested the king and his Kingsguard had grown too close, an echo of past scandals. Arya ignored them. Let them whisper. She knew the truth of her vow and the honor of her purpose. In the months that followed, challenges persisted. The Iron Islands flirted with rebellion. Dorne remained aloof, uncertain if it would accept Gendry's overtures. But each time a crisis arose, Arya lent her skill and her unwavering loyalty. She accompanied Gendry to Riverrun to negotiate with the Tullus, riding through perilous roads. She stood sentinel in the throne room during fractious debates over trade tariffs. She even scouted the Kingswood when rumors of bandits reached the capital, returning with a head count of their numbers. Her existence became legend among small folk, half-wolf, half-wraith, the girl who had outwitted death. Within the Kingsguard, she found comradeship and a sense of brotherhood that surprised her. Ser Will taught her advanced techniques with heavier blades, praising her for her speed and cunning. Ser Alan Graceford often teased her about her occasional frowns, but he did so with camaraderie rather than malice. Ser Edric Dane shared tales of his house's storied past, and she told him what she remembered of her Aunt Lyanna and Father Ned. Over time, the White Cloaks grew comfortable with her presence, forgetting the strangeness of a woman among their ranks. She was simply Ser Arya, one of them, perhaps more formidable than most, but still bound by the same vow. But with each victory or resolution of conflict, Arya sensed another storm building on the horizon. The realm was too big, too fractured. A single king could not mend every old wound, especially one without the fearsome might of dragons or the unwavering backing of all great houses. Gendry relied on alliances, on the willingness of others to maintain peace. And Arya knew from bitter experience how fragile such alliances could be. She wondered if there would ever be an end to the need for watchful vigilance. One twilight, after a particularly exhausting day of managing internal disputes between feuding lords, Arya found Gendry alone in the royal gardens, pacing among the hedges. She approached quietly, He turned, sighing. "How many battles do I fight that can't be won with a sword?" he murmured. "It was simpler when the threats were men like Oris Waters. At least I knew how to deal with him." "You deal with them by listening, by forging compromises," Arya said, remembering lessons from Sansa's letters. "That's your skill now. You're a blacksmith who must shape the realm, piece by piece, forging it into something strong." He cast her a wry smile. "I suppose so. Do you ever regret staying here, Arya? Tying yourself to this complicated life?" She paused, gazing at the setting sun beyond the garden walls. "Sometimes I miss the freedom of the road. But no, I don't regret it. My vow is mine, my choice, and I'm proud to stand by it." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. "You're an example to all my knights, you know. You've shown them what true loyalty is." She shrugged. "I just do what needs doing." In the hush of that evening, a sense of mutual understanding passed between them. Arya realized that though she had joined the Kingsguard for duty and loyalty, she had also forged a bond with Gendry that went beyond the usual formality of a knight and her king. They were friends, allies shaped by shared memories of loss and survival. The bond would never conform to the traditions of the realm, but it was theirs and it was strong. The days turned to weeks, and the city continued its slow, uneven recovery. One bright morning, as Arya patrolled the Red Keep, a raven arrived from Winterfell. The letter bore Sansa's seal, and Arya felt a flicker of emotion reading her sister's neat script. Sansa congratulated her on her new station, informed her of the North's steady prosperity, and hinted that she should visit if ever her duties allowed. Arya allowed herself a small smile. She tucked the letter away in a safe place, heartwarming at the thought that her family was well. The vow forbade her from claiming inheritance or marrying, but it did not sever the bonds of love. Her siblings were part of who she was. Time passed, with crises averted, conspiracies unraveled, alliances tentatively formed. Arya grew accustomed to hearing herself addressed as Ser Arya, to wearing the white cloak, to standing vigil outside Gendry's door at night. Yet she never forgot the child who once roamed these halls, clutching needle, dreaming of freedom and vengeance. In her quietest moments, she wondered if she had found a destiny that honored both the wolf blood in her veins and the graceful deadliness she'd learned in Bravos. Perhaps yes. Perhaps no. The realm, at least, was safer than it had been in years. One evening, while sitting in a guardroom polishing her sword, Arya was joined by Ser Edric Dane. He cleared his throat, awkward. "Ser Arya, there's talk that the king might finally marry to secure the throne with heirs. Have you heard?" She paused, glancing up. "I know the small council urges him to. Possibly the Dornish match." Edric nodded. "Yes, that's the rumor. The Master of Whispers says Dorne's current ruling princess demands certain concessions, but a marriage could bind them firmly. If that happens, we'll be busy protecting a new queen and eventually the royal children." He fiddled with a piece of cloth, looking uncertain. "How do you feel about that?" Arya frowned thoughtfully. How did she feel? Gendry's marriage was inevitable, she supposed. Kings needed heirs. I serve the crown. Whoever the king marries doesn't change my vow. Edric gave a half-smile. True. But it might change his. Responsibilities, obligations, that sort of thing. She shrugged, returning to her polishing. We all have obligations. If it makes the realm stronger, that's good. In her heart, she felt a twinge of something she couldn't quite name. Loss, maybe, or the recognition that the road ahead was diverging. Gendry's life was bound to the realm. Hers was bound to him, but only as his sworn shield. Whatever personal attachments she felt, they could never overshadow that simple truth. Not long after, the official announcement came. Gendry Baratheon would wed Princess Ileana Martell of Dorne. The courts buzzed with excitement and speculation. Preparations began in earnest, with a date set for the following spring. Envoys from Dorne arrived in King's Landing, carefully negotiating every detail. Arya found herself observing these negotiations from the sidelines, protecting the king from potential threats but also from too many interruptions. Ileana Martell arrived in the capital a month before the wedding, accompanied by a retinue of Dornish knights and ladies. Arya observed the princess from a distance. A tall, regal woman with keen eyes and an air of quiet determination. Ileana wore flowing silks in vibrant hues, her confidence unmistakable. She and Gendry conversed often, forging a tentative friendship. Arya watched them with an odd mix of relief and an unspoken ache. During a lull in the wedding preparations, Gendry and Ileana took a walk through the Red Keep's gardens, accompanied by several guards, Arya among them. The two royals spoke of Dorne's unique customs, of the spice-laden cuisine, and of the paramours and water gardens. Ileana teased Gendry about his blacksmith's arms, and Gendry, shyly flustered, tried to maintain composure. Arya remained silent, watchful. At one point, Ileana glanced at her. "Your Kingsguard is quite formidable," she said, addressing Gendry but clearly referencing Arya. "I've heard tales of her deeds." Gendry smiled fondly. "Ser Arya's worth 100 swords." Arya inclined her head, though she felt the princess's eyes linger. Ileana's lips curved slightly, as if noting some secret dynamic. Then they continued on, talking of wedding feasts and Dornish wine. Arya followed, steps measured, her face an impassive mask of calm. She would guard them both, her king and his bride-to-be, whether her heart twisted or not. As the wedding day loomed, foreign dignitaries and lords from across Westeros poured into King's Landing. It was to be a grand affair, the crown's attempt at showing unity and strength. Arya took her duties seriously, coordinating with fellow Kingsguard to ensure security. They doubled patrols, vetted guests carefully. Memories of the bloody weddings in recent history haunted her. She refused to let anything like that happen on her watch. On the morning of the ceremony, Arya stood in the throne room, wearing her polished white armor, her cloak draped flawlessly. The Iron Throne loomed behind them, and in front of the dais, the High Septon stood ready to perform the rites. Ileana Martell arrived in a shimmering gown, escorted by her Dornish knights. Gendry, clad in regal black and gold, waited for her. The entire realm seemed to hold its breath as the ceremony began, the High Septon's voice echoing through the hall. Arya felt strangely detached, as if watching a scene from someone else's life. She kept her senses sharp for any sign of danger, scanning the crowds packed into the hall. Lords, ladies, their retinues. Some faces glowed with hope or excitement, others displayed well-concealed resentment. But no threat emerged. The vows were exchanged without incident, the union sealed with a brief kiss. Thunderous applause followed, horns and pipes playing a celebratory tune. Gendry and Ileana turned to face the crowd as king and queen. Arya stood behind them, one step to the side, sword at her hip. She forced a small smile, though it felt distant. Protect the king and queen. That was her vow? The wedding feast stretched into the evening, filled with music, dancing, and lavish dishes. Arya remained on guard, drinking water instead of wine, ensuring her wits stayed sharp. Once, Ileana gestured for her to come closer, offering a toast. Arya politely lifted her goblet, nodded to the new queen, and sipped. Gendry watched them with an unreadable expression. Then the crowd swept the royal couple away to another dance, leaving Arya to her silent vigil. As the festivities continued, Arya slipped outside to the balcony for a moment of quiet. She rested her gloved hands on the balustrade, looking over the city. Behind her, the music pulsed in waves, laughter and song rising up into the night sky. The king had his queen, the realm a new hope for peace. If all went well, soon they would have heirs. Perhaps this was how stability was forged, step by step, vow by vow, alliance by alliance. A familiar voice broke her reverie. Hiding out here? She turned to see Gendry, still in his wedding finery but with a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. He must have danced half the night. She gave him a nod. Just taking a moment. There's a lot of people in there. He exhaled, running a hand over his hair. Too many. But it's done now. The realm has its queen. Yes. She studied his face. Are you happy? He hesitated, glancing back toward the hall. Ileana's a good woman. Smart, determined. We'll build something good together. Then he looked back at Arya, expression caught between pride and wistfulness. But sometimes I remember how everything used to be. And well, things change. That's the nature of it. Arya nodded. They do. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I want you to know I'll never forget all you've done for me and for this throne. If you ever need anything at all, just say the word. She met his eyes, the swirl of emotion in her chest both warm and aching. Your trust is all I need, your grace. He gave a rueful chuckle. Then you have it, Ser Arya, now and always. For a moment they stood there, the night breeze rustling her white cloak, the distant roar of revelry behind them. Then a call came from inside, the new queen beckoning for her husband. Gendry sighed, gave Arya a parting nod, and returned to the throng of well-wishers. Arya watched him go, her chest tight with unspoken sentiments. She turned back to the balcony, inhaling the cool air. She had made her choice long ago to become a knight of the Kingsguard to protect this king who was once just a boy traveling by her side. In that choice lay her fate, and she would see it through. When she finally returned to the feast, she resumed her position near the royal dais, keeping watch over the king and queen. The halls echoed with celebration long into the night. Courtiers and guests eventually retired, leaving only scattered pockets of drunken revelers. Dawn found Arya still awake, patrolling corridors and ensuring the newlyweds were secure in their chambers. The city for once seemed content, lulled by hope for the future. In the days that followed, it became clear that Ilyana Martell was a politically astute queen, forging stronger ties with Dorne and easing tensions that had simmered for generations. Trade improved, taxes were reevaluated, and lords across the realm slowly turned their eyes toward reconstruction rather than rebellion. Arya watched from the sidelines, her vow unbroken. She rode out with patrols, quelled minor uprisings, and thwarted any attempts on the royal family. She remained the quiet sentinel, the living blade of the king's justice. And though she occasionally dreamed of riding into the sunset, free of all constraints, she woke each day knowing she served a cause worth her sacrifice. Sometimes she exchanged letters with Sansa in Winterfell or with Jon, who still wandered the far north beyond the wall. Each letter reminded her that her heart would always be partly a wolf of the north. But here, in King's Landing, she had become something else as well, a sworn knight, forging her own legend. If the day came when the realm no longer needed her sword, perhaps she would walk away. But until then, she would stand guard, unwavering and proud, so that no child would have to bear the horrors she once did. Late one evening, Gendry stood upon the battlements where they had often spoken, gazing at the city lights. Ilyana was meeting with Dornish delegates in the solar, and Arya found the king alone, perhaps lost in thought. She joined him, wordlessly. After a long silence, he spoke without turning his head. I used to think the Iron Throne was just something to sit on, that power was simple. Now I realize it's heavier than any hammer I ever swung. But you carry some of that weight for me, Arya. Thank you. She nodded, understanding more than he knew. We all bear our burdens. But we choose them. You chose to claim the throne. I chose to serve you. He gave a quiet, almost sad smile. We did. Let's hope it was the right choice for the realm. His crown glinted in the moonlight, a band of steel shaped by the blacksmith who once wore rags. Arya remembered him as that boy in the Riverlands, raw and uncertain. Now he was King Gendry Baratheon, forging alliances, carrying a realm's destiny on his shoulders. She stood beside him, wearing the white cloak that symbolized her unwavering oath. The city lights below flickered like countless candles in the vast darkness. If chaos and war ever threatened those lights again, she would stand in the breach, sword in hand. She had sworn to protect this king and his realm, and protect it she would. As the night deepened, they parted ways, the king to his royal chambers, Arya to her guard duties. Her footsteps echoed in the dim corridors of the Red Keep, each step a testament to who she had become. Once, she had been a girl with nothing but the name Arya Stark and a sword named Needle. Now, she was Ser Arya, sworn shield of the realm, a silent watcher in the halls of power. She walked with confidence, free of regret, knowing she had chosen a path of honor rather than letting the world choose for her. Years might pass, bringing new threats and new alliances. Sorrow and joy would come, as they always did in Westeros. But Arya Stark would remain a stalwart figure in the Kingsguard, a symbol that the old ways could change, that a wolf of the north could stand guard for a southern king. And in every hush before dawn, as she patrolled the castle walls or watched the stars, she would remember the litany of faces and names that shaped her, forging her into the knight she now was. She would remember the father who believed in honor, the mother who wanted her to be a lady, the siblings scattered by war, the teachers who taught her mercy and vengeance. She would remember all of it, and let it guide her sword and her heart. She was Arya Stark, and she had chosen to serve and protect, to uphold a vow that might bring peace to a realm too long soaked in blood. And so she stood, day after day, year after year, a silent sentinel in white, unwavering, a guardian of the crown and a protector of the weak. If the people of Westeros spoke her name at all, they spoke it in hushed tones of respect, saying, "That is Ser Arya of the Kingsguard, once a wolf among lions, now a blade of the realm." And for Arya herself, Each sunrise began a new vigil. Each twilight another watch kept. All in service of the king she had chosen to stand beside. It was enough, for her heart was at peace, even in the heart of the city where she had once known only darkness. The vow was her freedom, her redemption, and her gift to a realm that had taken so much from her. So she gave it her all, every day, every breath, guarding the fragile promise of a better future for Westeros with the sharpest steel and the keenest eyes and a quiet, indomitable will. Arya Stark rose before dawn as she did every day, preparing to embark on her pre-dawn patrol of the Red Keep's outer walls. She was methodical about it, donning her brigandine beneath the white surcoat, buckling on her sword belt, then sliding her slender Valyrian steel blade into its sheath at her hip. The halls were silent at this hour save for the occasional gold cloak finishing his night's shift. She acknowledged them with a slight nod, moving with quick, measured steps through the Red Keep's torchlit corridors, her white cloak fluttering behind her. Today felt no different from 1,000 other mornings, yet everything in her life had changed since she first came to King's Landing as a child. Once a frightened girl with a wooden sword, now a king's sworn defender. She stepped out onto the ramparts where the chill of the morning air brushed her cheeks. Beyond the castle walls stretched King's Landing, the cramped roofs and winding alleys lost in the pre-dawn gloom. Lantern lights glimmered along the docks by the Blackwater Rush, and the shapes of anchored ships bobbed like restless shadows. She inhaled. The familiar stink of the city drifted up to her, the tang of fish, the reek of waste, the coal smoke that seeped from 100 chimneys. It should have repelled her, but she'd grown used to it over the years, learned to let the stench roll off her senses. Duty was duty, no matter how unpleasant. As she made her slow circuit, she exchanged greetings with a pair of gold cloaks who bowed respectfully, calling her Ser Arya. A small sliver of pride always flickered in her chest at the title. Not because she chased after glory like many knights, but because she had chosen this path for herself, for the realm, for a king she trusted. Even so, she never lingered on such feelings. Pride could dull the reflexes. She had learned that lesson repeatedly in her journey to this station. When she descended into the training yard, the sky had lightened to a pale gray, ceding the horizon to a watery sunrise. 3 of her fellow Kingsguard were already at their morning drills. Ser Alan Graceford, tall and sturdy, hammered at a training dummy with his longsword, testing footwork patterns. Ser Edric Dane faced Ser Will Bracken in a spar, their blunted practice swords clacking in quick, controlled sequences. Each wore the pale surcoat of the Kingsguard, though they had yet to put on their white cloaks. Arya allowed herself a brief moment of pride. For all their differences, this Kingsguard was unified, disciplined, and entirely loyal to the king they served. She joined them without fanfare, drawing her dulled practice sword to warm up. Ser Edric, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow, beckoned her to take his place against Ser Will. The older knight regarded Arya with a hint of a smile. "Ready to dance, Ser Arya?" She nodded, offering a slight grin in return. "Always, Ser Will." They faced off, white surcoats catching the morning's first rays as they assumed their stances. Ser Will went on the offensive, pressing her with textbook strikes, each blow precisely aimed at her midsection or shoulders. Arya parried, feeling the impact rattle through her arms. He was strong, but she was faster. She let his momentum carry him forward before stepping aside in a quick swirl. Her own riposte, a flash of steel, skimmed past his side. He pivoted, blocked, and answered with a diagonal slash that she ducked, rolling under his blade. Their dance continued, neither truly seeking to land a decisive blow. This was about technique and footwork. Yet Arya's heart beat faster, the old thrill stirring. There was something reassuring about the clarity of a fight, even a practice bout. At last, Ser Will signaled a halt, breathing heavily. "7 hells, girl, you never slowed down," he said, but there was admiration in his tone. Arya merely shrugged, returning her practice sword to the rack. She wiped sweat from her face, noticing the arrival of a few spectators, younger knights and squires peering over from the stable area. Some still found the sight of a woman in the Kingsguard remarkable. They finished their morning drills, then parted ways to fulfill the day's assignments. Arya headed to the royal apartments, where she was scheduled to stand guard at King Gendry's side during a small council meeting. The corridors grew busier as the castle staff awoke. She passed a row of servants carrying baskets of linens and jugs of water, a few of them bowing or curtsying hurriedly as she strode by. She offered no acknowledgement beyond a slight nod. She was focused on her duties. In the outer foyer of the king's private solar, 2 gold cloaks stood sentry. They stepped aside when they recognized her. Inside, Gendry and Queen Ileana Martell were in conversation over a table piled with scrolls. They broke off when Arya entered. Gendry gave a warm smile. "Good morning, Ser Arya." His voice was scratchy with fatigue though. He'd likely been up late with Ileana discussing the negotiations with the Iron Islands or the farmland disputes out in the Reach. Arya inclined her head. Your Grace. Your Grace, she added, turning to Ileana. The queen nodded politely. Ileana wore a flowing gown of deep orange reminiscent of the Dornish sun, and her thick black hair was styled in braids coiled at her nape. When she spoke, her voice was low, measured, a voice accustomed to careful negotiation. Arya admired her composure, though she doubted she'd ever truly warm to Ileana the way she might have with a friend. They were cordial, respectful, but separated by the gulf of the vow. The king's interests lay with his queen. Arya's sole duty was to ensure they both lived long enough to secure the realm. Shortly, the members of the small council began to arrive, the Master of Whispers, Ryam Hill, a slight man with ink-stained fingers and a perpetually guarded expression, the Master of Coin, Lady Cassana Swan, wearing a careful smile that belied the tension in her eyes, Lord Royce, Master of Laws, who carried a thick ledger under one arm, and others who filed in with hushed greetings and respectful bows. Arya took her position near the wall, arms at her sides, senses alert. She listened because she always listened, observing patterns of speech, flickers of body language, the subtlest clues that might unveil hidden plots. The council discussed the current problem of the Iron Islands, which were chafing under the new taxes imposed to help rebuild the capital. Lord Dagon Botley had sent a pointed letter, threatening that if the crown continued to bleed them with tariffs, the Ironborn might revert to their old ways. Gendry, eyes shadowed, rubbed his chin. The last thing we need is an Ironborn rebellion, he said, glancing at Ileana for support. But we can't simply exempt them from taxes. The roads and ports they use are in dire need of repair, and there must be equity for all the great houses. Ileana's tone was thoughtful. Perhaps a compromise, a temporary reduction offset by their investment in new shipbuilding projects that benefit the crown? Ryam Hill chimed in. They've refused similar proposals in the past, Your Grace. But I'll send out fresh feelers, see if we can broker a new arrangement. The conversation shifted to the Reach, where a succession dispute threatened to pit two branches of House Meadows against each other. Lord Royce was deep in explanation when Arya sensed movement at the door. She glanced sideways to see a page peeking in, face pale. The boy scurried over to Ryam Hill and whispered something in his ear. Ryam's expression tightened and he interrupted Lord Royce. Apologies, my lord. Your Graces, I have urgent news. A raven from Old Town arrived. It seems Ironborn longships have attacked a merchant fleet near the Shield Islands. There are casualties. A heavy silence descended. Gendry's jaw tightened as Ileana exhaled quietly. So much for negotiations, Gendry muttered. Send word to the Iron Islands at once, demanding an explanation. We cannot allow them to raid at will. If they will not come to the table, we'll have to consider a show of force. Arya watched, her heart beating calmly, but her mind already anticipating the possible repercussions. She'd faced the Ironborn once, during the chaos of the wars, and she knew how brutal they could be when pressed. Any show of force from Gendry risked inflaming them further. But inaction would signal weakness. The realm stood at a crossroads yet again. The council dissolved soon after, each member tasked with urgent duties, to send ravens, to prepare troop movements, to gather intelligence. Gendry and Ileana lingered in the solar, heads bent close in discussion. Arya remained at her post until Ryam Hill approached Gendry again, quietly. Your Grace, if there's any direct threat on the capital, we should strengthen harbor defenses and fortify the coast. Also, there's the matter of the negotiation with Bravos. Our naval alliances might come into play. Gendry nodded. Yes, see to it, he said, glancing at Arya. Sir Arya, I'd like you to coordinate with the Kingsguard. Make sure we're prepared for any potential infiltration or sabotage. The Ironborn can be cunning. I don't want them slipping assassins into the city under our noses. Yes, Your Grace, she replied, bowing. She understood that Gendry trusted her to keep watch in ways that extended beyond the mere physical presence of a guard. So many in the realm still saw her as the Wolf of the White Cloak, a figure of quiet, lethal vigilance. It was a role she'd embraced. She left the solar, her mind already racing through possibilities. The Ironborn, despite the repeated defeats in recent wars, remained a force to be reckoned with. They could strike unexpectedly by sea, pillage a stretch of coastline, and vanish before the crown's ships responded. Yet if Gendry overcommit to punishing them, half the realm might see it as an act of tyranny. Balancing those concerns was the king's burden. Arya had her own, ensuring the king's life and the queen's life were never so much as grazed by a blade. As Arya headed down the corridor, Ser Bracken fell in step beside her, likely heading the same direction. Heard about the Ironborn, he said, voice low. We'll need to be ready. The king wants the palace secure above all. Arya nodded. Let's plan a rotation ensuring at least 3 of us are always inside the Red Keep at any given time. The other 3 can handle any external duties. We'll double-check the city gates for weaknesses. He ran a hand over his short-cropped beard. Aye. If the Ironborn come, it won't be a siege, it'll be sabotage, or a kidnapping attempt, or something cunning. Though I doubt they'll dare strike the Red Keep directly. Arya thought of all the times she herself had slipped in and out of this fortress. The hidden passages, the labyrinth beneath the castle. If anyone knew ways around the walls, it was her. We'll keep watch, she murmured. Warn the gold cloaks, too, to watch the harbor for suspicious ships. Even merchant vessels might be used as Trojan horses. They parted each with tasks to do. Arya found a quiet moment to snatch a bite of bread and cheese in her chambers, washing it down with cool water from a clay pitcher. Her small room was Spartan as always, a bed, a trunk for her few belongings, a weapons rack. The white cloak hung on a peg, though she wore it most of the time. She unbuckled her sword belt, checked the blade for nicks, none, of course, then strapped it on again. Her mind rarely strayed from the job at hand, but as she left her chamber, a flicker of memory crossed her thoughts, how she used to roam Westeros, free as the wind, with no obligations save her own survival. Now she had the entire realm to think about. She told herself this was a worthy cause, but sometimes she felt the distant pull of open roads and distant horizons. Only for an instant, though. Duty was duty. Word of the Ironborn attack spread quickly. By nightfall, the Red Keep was abuzz with talk of warships, possible naval engagements, and the king's next move. The king's council hammered out a response, sending ravens to Pike demanding the immediate recall of any raiders. Predictably, no swift reply arrived. Gendry called up more men to the royal fleet in Blackwater Bay, readied the city watch for trouble, and trusted his master of whispers to root out any Ironborn sympathizers in the city. Arya, for her part, oversaw a renewed vigilance in the Red Keep's corridors and gates. Days slipped by, each one tense with anticipation. Yet the Ironborn did not strike again, and no official missives from the Iron Islands arrived. To Arya, it felt like the coiling of a serpent beneath water, unseen but hardly idle. She slept lightly, one eye open. Night after night, she took part in rotations that had her patrolling from the highest tower of the Red Keep to the deepest sub-basements, sometimes changing back into the guise of a common servant to slip through the city's taverns and docks. If the Ironborn were plotting infiltration, she wanted to know. During one of her clandestine excursions, she slipped into the Steadfast Mule, a dockside alehouse frequented by sailors and sellswords. Dressed in battered breeches, a loose shirt, and a hooded cloak, she fit in well enough with the crowd. The air reeked of stale beer and sweat, and men shouted over a drunken musician's off-key lute. Arya nursed a tankard of watered-down ale, eavesdropping on talk of shipping lanes and pirate sightings. Nothing conclusive. She saw no obvious Ironborn among the crowd. But at a corner table, a pair of men with the distinctive posture of ex-soldiers spoke in low voices about the Isles and a gathering at 10 Towers. Arya perked up, trying to inch closer without drawing attention. Before she could glean more, a brawl erupted near the bar, scattering chairs and flinging tankards. By the time she maneuvered through the chaos, the corner table was empty. She cursed softly under her breath. She returned to the Red Keep with only thin scraps of information. Rumors that Lord Harlaw was hosting a gathering of captains to decide on next moves, that the Ironborn might be taking advantage of the Crown's many obligations to strike at weak points. Hardly a revelation, but it confirmed that something was brewing. Gendry listened grimly when she relayed the rumor to him. "We're stretched thin," he admitted. "The Reach is a mess of feuds, the Westerlands are still rebuilding, and Dorne watches from afar. If the Ironborn are unified under a strong leader, they might see this as their chance." Arya said nothing, just nodded. She could not solve these problems for him. That was the king's burden, along with his council. Yet she would ensure no blade reached him or Queen Ileana in the night. The tension only mounted when more news arrived that a handful of ships from Lannisport had been seized at sea. Bodies washed ashore near Banefort, clearly murdered by Ironborn raiders. Gendry fumed openly now, though Ileana counseled caution. "We cannot rush into a war with the Iron Islands," she said, her dark eyes serious. "We need to focus on containing them, not igniting a full-scale conflict that might bleed us all." Gendry, pacing in the throne room, paused to level a look at her. "But how many raids must we endure before we strike back? The lords in the Westerlands are already calling for revenge. My mother's house was Baratheon, But my father was Robert. The West might remember him, might rally behind the crown for once. Or they might see me as weak if I do nothing. Ileana held his gaze, her posture regal. We can gather an alliance of fleets, yours, the Westerlands, perhaps the Tullus. A show of strength near Fair Isle might deter them. The king exhaled. Very well. Ryam, send word to Lords Lannister and Tully. Let's see if a combined naval demonstration will prompt them to stand down. If that fails, we'll plan a more aggressive strategy. Arya kept to the sidelines, scanning every face in the throne room. On her immediate right stood Sir Alan Graceford, and behind them were several courtiers, the usual cluster of watchers and whisperers. She saw varied reactions on their faces. Fear, anger, opportunistic gleams. It reminded her how precarious King Gendry's hold on the realm truly was. How quickly discontent could spark rebellion if the king seemed either tyrannical or too lenient. She forced herself not to dwell on politics. Her role was simpler: keep him safe. In the following weeks, preparations began. Ravens flew to the Westerlands, the Tullus, the Vale, and the Stormlands. Warships congregated off the coast of King's Landing, forming a small but capable fleet, ready to sail north and link with the Lannisters' vessels near Fair Isle. Talk of open conflict rumbled through the city's streets, and many small folk dreaded another war so soon after the last upheavals. The City Watch cracked down on unrest, carting away rabble-rousers who preached doomsday in the streets. Arya noticed a new undercurrent of tension among the Red Keep's staff. Servants spoke in hushed voices, anxious about the future. Amid these stirrings of war, Queen Ileana announced she was with child. The news rippled across the castle in a surge of cautious celebration. Cautious because an heir to the throne was a momentous thing, but also because she was still in the early stages of pregnancy, and the realm was at the brink of conflict. Gendry's face shone with hope when he shared the news privately with Arya. I didn't think this day would come, he murmured, eyes bright. A child. My child. Arya offered a small smile, though it felt strangely bittersweet. Congratulations, Your Grace. The realm will be pleased. He laughed softly. Some of them, at least. Then his expression sobered. I'll need you now more than ever, Arya. I need to ensure Ileana is safe through this pregnancy. If the Ironborn discover how vulnerable we might be, Arya set a hand on the pommel of her sword. No harm will come to her or the child. I promise. Gendry nodded, relieved, though lines of worry creased his face. Thank you. He hesitated, as if weighing his next words. Sometimes I wish. Well, never mind. We all have duties. He cleared his throat and gestured to the door. Walk with me. I want to hear what you learned from your last patrol. They left, striding through the corridor, the bright banners of House Baratheon overhead, golden stag on black, and the king listened attentively as Arya relayed her observations. She had nothing fresh to report beyond the ongoing anxiety swirling in the city. But for Gendry that seemed enough. He thanked her, parted ways, and headed to the council chambers. She watched him go, acutely aware of how fatherhood was about to reshape his life. She wondered if it would make him more determined or more cautious, more fearful of risk. A child on the way. A precious piece of the future he so desperately wanted to protect. As the days stretched into weeks, the combined royal fleet set sail from King's Landing toward Fair Isle. Lord Lannister's ships awaited them there, along with a token force from the Tullus. While Gendry remained in the capital, overseeing the realm, he sent a trusted admiral, Lord Hollis Byrch, to command at sea. Ileana's condition made Gendry reluctant to travel, and besides, if the Iron Islands did something desperate, the king had to be able to respond swiftly from the capital. Tension hummed in the corridors of the Red Keep, everyone waiting for news of a naval skirmish or a swift compromise. During these uneasy weeks, Arya's days settled into a pattern of watchful patrols, training, and brief forays into the city to gather intelligence. She found herself conferring more often with Ryam Hill, combining her knack for quiet infiltration with his vast network of spies. Ryam, for his part, seemed both intrigued and slightly uneasy around her. Sometimes she sensed that her presence, silent and lethal, put him off balance. But the Master of Whispers wasn't fool enough to refuse her help. They collaborated to ensure any Ironborn agents in the city were rooted out. Still, nothing conclusive emerged. If the Ironborn had spies in King's Landing, they kept quiet and careful. One night, near midnight, Arya was awakened by urgent knocking at her chamber door. She sprang up, blade in hand, heart pounding. When she yanked the door open, she found a gold cloak messenger panting and bowing. Ser Arya, urgent summons. The queen was taken ill. You're needed at once. Arya snatched her cloak and followed the messenger at a run through dim, torchlit corridors. Her mind churned. Had there been poison, an attack? Had the stress taken its toll on Illyana's pregnancy? By the time she reached the queen's apartments, the corridor was filled with servants and two of Arya's fellow Kingsguard, Ser Will and Ser Alan. She slipped past them and entered the bedchamber. Inside, Gendry sat on the edge of the bed, Illyana's hand clasped in his. The queen was pale, her hair damp with sweat, but she was conscious. A maester hovered at her side, face pinched with concern. Arya approached quietly, scanning the scene for threats. She saw no sign of an attacker, no evidence of foul play. The maester, an older man named Lares, gave Arya a grim nod. Her grace experienced severe pains and dizziness. It may be a complication of her condition. I've given her a tonic, and she must rest. Illyana grimaced. I'll be fine, she rasped. Just help me sit. Gendry fussed, helping her lean back against the pillows. His face betrayed raw worry, more than Arya had ever seen. Is it safe for her to continue normal activities? The king asked the maester, voice tight. She's been pushing herself with negotiations. She should rest, the maester insisted. No strenuous activity, no undue stress. The first months are delicate. Arya stood silently, feeling a pang of empathy she hadn't expected. She'd never imagined herself in Illyana's place, bearing a child, but she understood the vulnerability of it. She also recognized Gendry's fear. If something happened to Illyana or the child, not only would it be a personal tragedy but a political disaster. She stepped forward, clearing her throat. We'll increase security around the queen's apartments, she said softly. Minimize her need to move about. Illyana glowered, though it lacked real fire. I don't want to be coddled, Ser Arya. But yes, perhaps fewer public appearances for now. Gendry nodded gratefully. Yes. Keep her safe. I'll manage the daily business. He turned to Illyana and stroked her hair back from her brow. Rest now, he murmured. Arya withdrew, leaving them to their privacy. Outside, Ser Will and Ser Alan awaited her. They gave her questioning looks and she shook her head slightly. No attack. She's unwell, needs rest. We'll increase our guard schedule to ensure no one disturbs her. They nodded in agreement and the commotion in the corridor gradually dispersed. Arya stayed a while longer, leaning against the wall, arms folded. She recalled the countless times her own mother, Catelyn Stark, had worried over her children's well-being. Now Gendry was in a position not so different, fearing for his wife and unborn child. The realm never paused for personal crises, though. Wars and disputes churned on, indifferent to the king's heartbreak. Arya clenched her jaw, remembering the vow she had taken, a vow that set her life on a course of blood and steel. She would not fail in it. The next morning came with news from Fair Isle, a tense standoff between the Crown's fleet and the Ironborn longships. No open battle had erupted yet, but the Ironborn captains refused to withdraw, claiming they were merely protecting their traditional reaving grounds. Lord Hollisbeire wrote that the Ironborn gave no sign of bending to the Crown's demands. The ships bobbed off the coast in a show of defiance, daring the royal fleet to attack first. Meanwhile, rumors abounded that Pike was hosting a massive gathering of the Ironborn lords, likely to decide how far they'd push this conflict. Gendry read the Raven's missive aloud to Arya, Illyana, who insisted on being present despite her illness, and the small council. The king's frustration mounted. They're testing me. They want me to either attack and risk a long, bloody war at sea or back down and appear weak. He drummed his fingers on the table. I need a better move than either of those. Something that forces them to see reason. Illyana, pale but resolute, spoke quietly. We might consider dispatching a direct envoy to Pike. Show them we're willing to treat if they cease raids. Offer them some spoils in exchange for peace if necessary. Lord Royce frowned. Offer them spoils, your grace? That sets a dangerous precedent. Every petty warlord who wants concessions from the crown might follow their example. Gendry sighed. He's right, we can't simply bribe them. But perhaps a parley at least to hear their demands. We can do that without capitulating. Arya, standing guard by the wall, found her attention caught. A parley on Pike sounded fraught with risk. Who would lead it? If the king himself went, it would be too dangerous. The Ironborn could kill him or hold him hostage. But sending a lord of moderate importance might not carry enough weight to impress them. The conversation in the room echoed her thoughts. Gendry turned to the group. We need someone strong, someone who commands respect. But also someone they might be wary of crossing. I can't go, not with the queen's condition. Someone else must. Hill cleared his throat. Your grace, might I suggest Ser Davos Seaworth? He's well loved in the north and the Vale, known for his honesty, once a king's hand. But he's old now, rarely leaves his seat in the Rainwood. Still, he might be our best chance if we can convince him to come. Gendry shook his head. He's a good man, but the Ironborn don't fear honest men. They scorn them. We need someone who can handle themselves if the parley goes sour. At that a hush fell. Arya noticed several pairs of eyes drifting to her. She stiffened imperceptibly. She had faced Ironborn before, but going as an envoy? She was no diplomat. And yet, a sliver of her mind recognized that of all the king's allies, she might indeed be the one best suited to survive among the Ironborn if negotiations fell apart. She could hold her own. Her name carried weight, the Wolf of the White Cloak, rumored assassin, a Stark of Winterfell, though sworn to the crown. But a Kingsguard did not leave the king's side lightly. Gendry's eyes locked onto hers, and there was a flicker of anguish in them. Arya, I know it's a lot to ask. You're my shield, but you might be the only one they'd hesitate to kill on sight. She let out a breath. The memory of her father's execution, of the heartbreak that followed, of her years wandering, all of it flickered through her mind. She had come to the Kingsguard to protect Gendry, not to go on diplomacy missions. But she also understood that if a parley might avert a full-blown war, she had a chance to save countless lives, including Gendry's unborn child from inheriting a realm on fire. Duty had more shapes than standing by his throne. Still, she hesitated. Your grace, my vow is to protect you. Going to Pike would leave you without one of your sworn swords. Gendry's voice was quiet. We have 5 others. And there are no immediate threats in the capital besides the possibility of sabotage. Ilyana is unwell, and I can't leave her, but if I send a lesser envoy, the Ironborn might not respect the gesture. This must be someone of great renown, someone who can promise them the king's word while making it clear that crossing you would bring wrath they can't afford. Arya glanced around the room. Hill looked thoughtful, Lord Royce uneasy, Lady Cassanna Swan simply resigned. Ilyana caught Arya's gaze and dipped her head. It might be the best chance for peace, the queen said softly. If you think you can endure the risk. Arya inhaled slowly. The idea of traveling to Pike churned her stomach. She thought of tall, jagged cliffs lashed by stormy seas, the drowned gods' taste of salt and iron. She remembered hearing tales of what the Ironborn did to hostages if negotiations failed. But there was an odd clarity in that moment. If her presence could avert war, was that not also a form of service to the king? The vow to protect did not always mean standing next to him with a sword drawn. Sometimes it meant going out into the world to shield him and the realm from harm. At length she nodded. Very well. I'll go. Gendry exhaled, relief warring with guilt in his eyes. Thank you, Arya. We'll arrange a proper escort. Some ships from the royal fleet to show we mean business, but not so many that it looks like an invasion. You'll have official authority to negotiate terms to end the raids under the condition that we'll call off any blockade or further naval action if they comply. Hill interjected. I'll prepare the necessary documents for you to carry, Ser Arya. But remember, the Ironborn respect strength above all. Lean on that. Show them that this is their last chance before we crush them. Arya managed a grim half-smile. I'll do what must be done. The rest of the day was a blur of preparations. Arya met with the master of ships, a gaunt man named Lord Elwood Sunglass, who was to accompany her with 3 war galleys. They'd sail to Pike under a flag of truce. The other Kingsguard expressed concern at her departure, each offering counsel. Serwell reminded her that the Ironborn might try to separate her from her guard the moment she stepped ashore. Ser Alan pointed out that a handful of the king's men once survived captivity on the Iron Islands by feigning enthusiasm for the drowned god. She took in their advice, the flurry of words swirling around her. But in the end, she was who she was, a Stark at heart, a woman forged by adversity, a knight with enough cunning to stay alive among assassins. She would rely on herself first. Late that night, she visited Gendry in his private solar. The king was hunched over a map of the Iron Islands, the candlelight carving out the shadows on his face. Ilyana had already retired. The maester insisted she rest. He looked up when Arya entered, exhaustion etched in every line of his expression. "I'm sorry I'm sending you away," he murmured. "But I can't think of anyone else I trust more." Arya approached the table, eyes on the islands marked by rough sketches. "You do what you must, your grace. I'll find a way to bring them to heel or to reason. One way or the other." He set a hand on the table, fingertips pressing the parchment. "They'll test you, maybe threaten to drown you for their drowned god. Just be careful." Her lips quirked with a subdued smile. "I've survived worse. Trust me." "I do," Gendry said, voice low. "I only wish." He cut himself off, then shook his head. "When will you depart?" "First light. The ships are already being provisioned." He straightened, looking as though he wanted to say more. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "I'll walk with you to the yard when you leave. To see you off." She nodded. "As you wish." They stood there for a moment in silence, an unspoken tension brimming between them. Memories of the roads they'd traveled as children, the bond they'd forged that now rested beneath layers of duty. The vow of the Kingsguard forbade marriage or inheritance, but it did not forbid friendship. Arya reached out and placed a hand on Gendry's forearm briefly, a rare gesture of reassurance. Then she pulled away, bowing. "Rest, your grace. You'll need your strength." He watched her go, the candle flames flickering behind him, and she knew that even if no one else did, he understood the magnitude of what she was attempting. Dawn arrived, bleary and cold, with a slight drizzle slicking the Red Keep's courtyard. Arya wore a plain travel cloak over her white surcoat, her sword belted at her side, and a small satchel of supplies slung across her shoulder. 24 hand-picked men-at-arms clad in House Baratheon's colors would accompany her. She greeted them with curt nods. Lord Elwood's sunglass waited near the gates, wrapped in a cloak against the damp, scanning the sky as if hoping the weather would improve. Gendry appeared, flanked by Ser Will and Ser Edric Dane. He wore no crown, only a simple black cloak pinned at his shoulder with a golden stag brooch. Ilyana was absent, likely still confined to her bed. Gendry crossed the courtyard and took Arya's hand in his briefly and unkingly gesture. "The realm rides with you," he said, voice rough. Arya squeezed his hand, then released it. "I'll do my best to ensure war doesn't follow." With that, she turned, mounted her horse, and led the procession out of the Red Keep. The gates yawned wide, and they rode through streets just beginning to stir in the early morning light. The city smelled of whetstone and old ash, and a few market stalls were barely opening. Some onlookers caught sight of the king's men and recognized Arya's white surcoat. Whispers followed them. "Ser Arya, the wolf in white, where is she going?" Arya ignored them, focusing on the road ahead. They reached the harbor where 3 galleys waited, sails furled in the drizzle. Crews bustled about, loading barrels and crates. Arya dismounted and made her way up the gangplank of the largest galley, named the Sea Lion, oddly enough, a vessel once seized from Lannister loyalists. Now it bore the royal stag on its prow. Lord Elwood greeted her, then barked orders for the ship to prepare to cast off. Standing at the stern, Arya watched King's Landing recede as the sailors hoisted the sails. The drizzle clung to her eyelashes, and she brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead. She felt a subtle shift in her chest, fear, anticipation, a small pang of regret at leaving Gendry behind. She remembered countless departures by ship, bravos, the crossing to Winterfell. Every voyage had changed her. This one would too. She was sailing into the heart of Ironborn territory to talk peace or intimidation. One misstep could mean death. The crossing took over a week. The drizzle gave way to stormy weather that hammered the decks with rolling seas. Arya, well accustomed to ships by now, kept her balance easily, though many of the men-at-arms turned green about the gills. Lord Elwood spent the days double-checking the supplies and conferring with Arya about parley strategies. "I'm no diplomat either," he admitted grimly, "but at least we can present a united front. You be the steel, and I'll be the voice of reason." Arya nodded. "Works for me." When they rounded the coastline near the Westerlands, they spotted signs of the standoff, a cluster of crown warships floating near Fair Isle, black sails with the stag emblem alongside a smaller contingent of Lannister ships. Farther out, Ironborn longships lurked, their prow shapes carved into krakens or leviathans. They did not engage, seemingly content to watch. Arya's little convoy pressed on northwest, heading straight for Pike. The tension among the crew grew palpable, every man glancing nervously at the horizon. 2 days later, the towering cliffs of Pike hove into view, a jagged silhouette against a steel-gray sky. The keep itself clung to the rocks, connected by swaying bridges, battered perpetually by the roaring sea. Waves crashed below, sending plumes of white foam skyward. The place looked as forbidding as any Arya had imagined, more so. They raised a flag of truce, a plain white banner, as they approached. Several iron-borne longships moved to intercept them, their crews bristling with axes and spears. For a moment it seemed they might attack regardless of the parley. But eventually one of the longships pulled alongside, and a grim-faced iron-borne captain with salt-crusted hair demanded to know their business. Lord Elwood stepped forward, stating they came on behalf of King Gendry Baratheon to treat with the Lord Reaper of Pike. The captain eyed Arya, noticing her white surcoat beneath her cloak. "So the wolf in white is real," he muttered. "If you try any treachery, we'll feed you to the sea." He spat over the side, then signaled for them to proceed, escorted by iron-borne ships that flanked them all the way into the rocky bay. They anchored in deep water near a precarious stone dock. Arya led a small landing party, herself, Lord Elwood, and a dozen men-at-arms, all uncomfortably aware that they were outnumbered. The iron-borne watchers on the dock glowered, fingering their weapons. Saltwind whipped Arya's hair around her face. She kept her posture steady, one hand resting loosely on the hilt of her sword. If a fight broke out now, they'd likely die, but she refused to show fear. They were escorted along a narrow path hacked into the cliffside, the sea thundering below. Once or twice, Arya glanced down at the dizzying drop and forced herself to focus on her footing. Water sprayed them in frigid gusts. She recalled traveling through the Vale's icy heights once, thinking that nothing could be as dangerous as those mountain passes. This might be worse, one slip and you'd vanish into the swirling maw of the sea. At last, they reached Pike's main courtyard, a bleak space of wet stone overshadowed by towering walls. Ironborn warriors milled about, no sense of typical southern courtly protocol. Among them, a few figures wore hints of wealth, cloaks trimmed in dark fur, iron rings on their arms. One of these approached, a tall, lean man with a braided black beard and scars etched across his left cheek. He wore armor of boiled leather reinforced with metal plates shaped like fish scales. His voice was low, rasping. "I am Roderick Harlaw, Castellan of Pike in Lord Greyjoy's absence. You come to speak? Then speak." Arya surveyed him calmly. "We seek Lord Greyjoy himself. Is he here?" Roderick Harlaw's scar twisted in a sneer. "He's away at Great Wyke, meeting with captains who've returned from their reavings. But I have authority here. If you've come to talk terms, talk them to me." Lord Elwood glanced at Arya, clearing his throat. "We bring a message from King Gendry Baratheon. He demands a halt to all raids on the Crown's ships and coastal villages. In exchange, the king is willing to." Harlaw cut him off. "I care nothing for your king's demands. We are Ironborn. We pay the iron price. If your king's ships sail our waters, we'll take what's ours." Arya lifted her chin, voice cold. "There's no your waters, the seas belong to no single man. You're attacking merchant vessels, murdering innocent men. The Crown will not tolerate such lawlessness. You stand on the brink of war." Harlaw bared his teeth in a grin that showed broken, yellowed edges. "War. We were born in war, weaned on salt and iron. Let the bastard king come if he dares." A hush fell over the courtyard. Lord Elwood flushed with anger, but Arya forced a steady calm. "I am Arya Stark, sworn to House Baratheon, but of the North. I came here to offer you a final chance at peace. If you continue your raids, the Crown's fleets and armies will descend upon you. You will lose." Harlaw spit on the ground near her boots. "You think we fear you? We've crushed Baratheon fleets before. And your father was no king, he was a steward to traitors. The North is far, girl, and we have no fear of wolves." Arya's lips thinned. She reminded herself to remain controlled, no outbursts, no sign of weakness. "You mistake me, Harlaw. I'm not here to threaten, only to deliver terms. If you refuse, the next thing you'll see is the king's wrath, and it will be more than you can handle." A series of Ironborn warriors started to circle, tension crackling in the air. One man brandished an axe, leering at Arya. "Let's take the wolf as a thrall, see how she likes the drowned god's justice." Lord Elwood murmured to Arya, "We should leave. This is no place for negotiation without Greyjoy." She nodded, but kept her gaze locked on Harlaw. "Where's Lord Greyjoy?" "We came to treat with him, not his castellan." Harlaw smirked. "Great Wyke, as I said. He'll return in a few days. You want to wait? Fine. We'll see if he'll hear your pleas." Then he glanced around. "But you and your men will remain here in Pike. Let's call it protective custody." Lord Elwood bristled. "We never agreed, eh?" "Those are my terms," Harlaw said with a lazy shrug. "You leave now, you'll sail back with empty hands. Or we can kill you here, and your corpses can feed the crabs. Your choice." Arya's blood pounded, but she kept her face cold. This was a trap, yet if they refused, they'd accomplish nothing. A part of her itched to cut her way out, but that would be suicidal in the face of so many Ironborn. They needed to bide their time, hope that meeting Lord Greyjoy would yield a better chance at a real negotiation. She exhaled. "We'll wait," she said curtly. "But do not think we'll tolerate mistreatment." Harlaw let out a barking laugh. "Oh, I'll find accommodations for you, Wolf. And your men." He gestured, and the Ironborn warriors closed in, effectively confiscating the group's freedom. They were escorted across a narrow bridge to a squat tower overlooking the sea. Inside were sparse rooms furnished with rough bedding and a single fireplace. Arya inspected the place quickly, noting that the windows were narrow arrow slits and the single door was guarded. Still, it wasn't a dungeon, more like a grim guest suite. She refused to appear rattled, moving calmly as though this all were routine. Outside, the wind howled and she heard the crash of waves against the cliff. Once the Ironborn departed, leaving 2 guards outside, Lord Elwood let out a shaky breath. 7 hells. We're prisoners. Arya tilted her head, scanning the room. They won't kill us yet. They want to see how valuable we are as hostages. Possibly they hope the king will ransom us if negotiations fail. A handful of men-at-arms cursed or looked dismayed. Arya knelt by the fireplace, checking the embers. Someone had lit a small fire, which at least offered some heat. The tower walls were damp, glistening with salt. "We'll do as they say for now, wait for Greyjoy. If negotiations fail, we'll find another way." Lord Elwood paced. "What about the ships in the bay?" Arya lifted a shoulder. "Likely seized or heavily guarded. They'll have watchers posted. We can't risk a direct assault. Let's see if the Greyjoy is more rational than Harlaw." Inwardly, she scolded herself for not anticipating this. Yet realistically, there'd been no way to force the Ironborn to give them free rein. She settled in for a tense vigil, instructing the men to keep calm and avoid antagonizing their guards. The days that followed tested Arya's patience. Harlaw only visited occasionally, taunting them with remarks about the sea's power and the futility of the crown's demands. He offered them the bare minimum of food, salted fish, hard bread, water laced with brine. The men grew restless and resentful, but Arya insisted on discipline. They sharpened their blades on the stone floor, took turns sleeping and standing watch. One of the men, a barrel-chested sergeant named Torm, tried to pry open a window slit, but it was firmly set in the stone. Arya explored the tower's corners, seeking any hidden passages or structural weaknesses. She found none. The place was built for captivity. Late on the second night, as gusts rattled the walls, Arya stood by a narrow slit of a window looking out into the blackness where the sea raged below. She thought of Gendry, wondered if he'd heard of their predicament. The king might be at a crossroads again, threatening war or mounting a rescue. She hoped he'd hold his nerve, not risk a foolhardy assault that might doom them all. Her breath fogged the cold stone. The North's chill was different, but she found some kinship with this harsh environment. Both were unrelenting, inhuman forces. Morning came with a dull, pewter sky. She awoke from a brief doze to the sound of heavy footsteps outside the door. It swung open, revealing Roderick Harlaw in the corridor, flanked by a half-dozen armed men. Harlaw's scarred face was split by a sardonic grin. "Lord Greyjoy returns today," he announced. "He'll see you at sunset in the Great Hall. Try not to embarrass yourselves." He tossed them a sack of slightly fresher bread and a jug of weak ale. Arya asked for more provisions but was ignored. After the door slammed shut, she turned to the men. "We'll speak to Greyjoy. Keep your wits about you. Even if it looks hopeless, don't provoke a fight unless we have no choice." "Understood." They murmured agreement. Each man had his sword, though they were effectively cornered. Arya swallowed a knot of tension. Meeting Lord Greyjoy could be the turning point. Either he would see reason or the Ironborn's defiance would harden into open conflict. Sunset arrived in a blaze of ruddy orange, but the keep's walls blocked most of the horizon. Harlaw's men came for them, ushering them out of the tower and across the courtyard. Arya led the way, cloak snapping in the gusting wind. Their guards herded them into a cavernous hall carved of dark stone. Braziers flickered, illuminating a damp floor strewn with rushes. At the far end, upon a chair of black driftwood, sat Harren Greyjoy, Lord Reaper of Pike. He was younger than Arya expected, perhaps in his mid-30s, with long, tangled hair the color of slate. His eyes were hard, set beneath a prominent brow. He wore scaled armor and had a large war axe resting across his lap. Other Ironborn captains stood around him, some openly armed. She counted at least 24. More ringed the edges of the hall, spectators to the drama. Lord Elwood started forward, but Arya lifted a hand, signaling she would speak first. She stepped across the rushes, stopping a respectful distance from Greyjoy's seat. "I am Arya Stark, Knight of the Kingsguard to Gendry Baratheon, King of the Undulls and the First Men. I come to speak terms to end your raids." Greyjoy's lips curved in a humorless smile. So Harlaw tells me. You come to bend us to your king's will, is that it? Arya forced herself to remain calm. To find a solution that avoids drowning these islands in blood. You must know the crown can't ignore these attacks. Greyjoy's hand stroked the shaft of his axe. The Ironborn have reaved for centuries. It's our way. Why should we stop now for a blacksmith's bastard who calls himself king? Lord Elwood spoke up, voice trembling with anger. That bastard sits on the Iron Throne by the will of the lords and people. The realm will unite against you if you continue this lawlessness. Greyjoy barely spared him a glance, his gaze returning to Arya. Is that what the White Wolf says? That we must yield or face unity? His tone dripped with skepticism. Westeros is seldom united, especially not behind a man like Gendry Baratheon. Perhaps you forget how often the realm splinters. Arya set her jaw. We have no illusions about unity, but we have enough might to crush you. And these raids achieve nothing but misery. The crown offers a last chance, cease your attacks and we'll withdraw our fleets from your shores. In time, the king might even negotiate trade privileges. A low ripple of laughter spread among the Ironborn captains. One spat, trade? As if we're merchants from the Reach? We take what we want, iron price. Greyjoy raised a hand, silencing them. His pale eyes fixed on Arya's. You come with threats. I could kill you here and now. She dipped her head slightly. Yes, you could. But that gains you no advantage. A king's envoy is protected by parley custom, even the Ironborn must respect that, or risk the entire realm descending on you like wolves. Greyjoy tapped his axe, expression thoughtful. You're not like other Southerners, Lady Stark. I see something else in you. They say you killed men all across the 7 kingdoms, that you even wore the faces of the dead. Rumors of her faceless man training, she realized. She held his gaze without flinching. I did what I had to do to survive wars that men like you started. His grin revealed crooked teeth. Perhaps you understand us better than your fancy king does. But that doesn't mean we'll bow. He glanced around at his captains. We gather to decide our future. Some want to strike deep into the Westerlands, loot Lannisport itself. Others call for caution. Tell me, if we let your king keep his gold and trade ships, what do we get in return? Starving in these rocks? Arya considered her words carefully. We can discuss a lifting of certain taxes or rights to certain fishing lanes if you abide by the crown's laws. That might be more profitable than a dozen reavings with less bloodshed. A storm of muttering erupted among the Ironborn. Greyjoy's face was impassive. We've heard such promises before. They always end in the crown trying to subjugate us. He leaned forward, eyes narrow. I'll grant you this, Stark, you have nerve coming here. But you're a fool if you believe your king's gloved hand will treat us fairly. She felt frustration bubbling. Negotiation with the Ironborn was like negotiating with the wind, impossible to pin down. Still, she tried again. Tell us what you want beyond reaving. If a workable arrangement exists, let's hear it. Greyjoy's scowl deepened. Before he could speak, one of his captains, a wiry woman with a silver dagger at her belt, interjected. We want no taxes. Freedom to sail where we will, no interference in old reaving rights. We keep what we take on the seas. Lord Elwood bristled. That's impossible. It defies the very notion of law. The Ironborn woman shrugged. Then we're at an impasse. Greyjoy rose from his driftwood seat, hefting his axe. The hall fell silent. You see, Stark? They will not bend, not even if I wished it. We are Ironborn. We take salt wives, pay the iron price, and we do not kneel to a southern king. Not for trade rights, not for gold. Arya realized in a flash that words alone would not sway them. The Ironborn had a proud, brutal culture. They might only yield if forced into a corner or offered a truly enticing alternative. She thought of Sansa's cunning in negotiations, wondered how her sister would approach this. Perhaps remind them that the realm was different now. But that line of reasoning would fall on deaf ears here. The tension soared. She tried one last angle, then consider what happens if you defy the crown. You'll face more than the Baratheon fleet. The Westerlands will join, the Reach may join, and the North will not stay idle. Even Dorne might decide to take vengeance for old grudges. You'll be surrounded by enemies on all sides. Even if you sink some ships, eventually the Iron Islands will drown in blood. Your women and children will starve, your towers crumble. Is that worth the pride of continuing these raids? Greyjoy stared at her for a long, silent moment. The hush in the hall was absolute. Then a rough chuckle broke from his throat, and it spread among the captains like a slow wave. Some parted to let him pace closer to Arya, axe in hand. She stood rigid, forcing herself not to grab her sword. If it came to a fight, she'd have no chance amid so many. Yet she refused to cower. He stopped within a pace of her, gaze flicking over her face. You speak boldly. And you might be right. A day could come when the entire realm unites to crush us. But that day isn't today. For now, your king is scrambling to hold the peace in the south. We hear the rumors of feuding lords in the Reach and trouble in Dorne. We doubt he can muster the might you claim. Meanwhile, our axes are sharp. Arya said nothing. The hush was deafening, every breath amplified in the torchlight. Greyjoy made a small, dismissive gesture. I'm done talking. Your king demands we cease grieving, we refuse. If he wants to come and burn the islands, let him try. We'll be waiting. Roderick Harlaw, standing off to the side, gave a triumphant grin. Greyjoy turned his back on Arya, heading for his seat. Take them away, he said to his guards, they can watch from their tower as the seas run red. In that moment, Arya's frustration flared. She stepped forward, ignoring the men-at-arms who tried to block her. Then you've chosen war? Greyjoy half-turned, the flicker of torchlight catching in his eyes. War is what we know. If your king had sense, he'd leave us to ours. But if he insists, we will meet him on the waves. A sharp jab of a spear pressed against Arya's side, forcing her back. She realized there would be no more discussion. She glanced at Lord Elwood, who looked pale. It seemed their mission had failed. The Ironborn were too entrenched in their ways, too convinced the crown couldn't unify enough force to subjugate them again. She allowed the guards to herd her and her men from the hall, every muscle tense with anger and dread. They were marched back to the tower and locked inside once more. Lord Elwood slumped onto a stool, cursing under his breath. That was no negotiation. Just an execution stayed by a thread. Arya paced the damp floor, mind racing. We have to get out. Send word to the king. Let him know war is likely. She thought of the small birds Ryam Hill might have sent, of Gendry possibly mustering more ships. But the Iron Islands were formidable. And if the realm was not truly united, it could become a drawn-out bloodbath. One of the men, Torm, groaned. We've tried. Our ships are guarded. The tower is secure. How do we escape? Arya paused, scanning the walls. If I can slip out, maybe I can find a smaller boat. Signal our fleet. I'll come back for you. Lord Elwood's eyes widened. Alone? That's madness. Her gaze was cool. I've done worse. But first, we must see if there's a chance Greyjoy will rethink. If not, I'll move tonight. The sea might be my best ally under darkness. He stared at her as if she'd sprouted wings. You'll be dashed on the rocks, or fall into the sea, or run straight into Ironborn guards. She shrugged slightly. They won't expect it. And I've been known to move quietly. She recalled her time in Bravos, the stealth and cunning it demanded. Even if this fortress was alien, it had cracks. Every fortress did. The men spoke in hushed tones, wondering if there was a more direct approach, bribing guards, staging a fight. But Arya ended the speculation with a firm plan. Wait for nightfall, see if the Ironborn posted fewer watchers, then attempt an escape. If she succeeded, she'd try to get a message to their ships in the bay or even beyond, warning them. If she failed, well, she preferred not to dwell on that. That evening, as darkness fell across Pike and the wind howled, Arya prepared. She removed her white surcoat, carefully tucking it into her satchel. The bright cloth would be too conspicuous. Underneath, she wore tight-fitting leathers. She coiled a rope from the makeshift bedrolls, tying them together into a short line. It wasn't nearly enough for safe climbing down a cliff, but maybe it would help. She sharpened her dagger on a stone, the rasp echoing in the gloom. The men watched her with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Near midnight, after the guards had done their usual patrol, she slipped to the tower door. Pressing her ear to the thickwood, she listened. Silence, save for the distant crash of waves. Stay quiet, she told the men. Pray the next time you see me it's with a rescue. Then she set to work on the hinges, quietly unfastening pins with a small pick she always kept hidden. She'd learned such tricks ages ago, long before she wore a white cloak. The old instincts rose to the surface. The pins slid out with minimal noise. She eased the heavy door forward, inch by inch. It groaned faintly, but so far, no shouts. She slipped through the gap, flattening herself against the corridor wall. Her ear. Teeth thudded in her chest. One slip and she'd be done. The corridor was lit by 2 torches in sconces. The guard station was around the corner. She could hear at least 2 men talking in low voices, occasionally laughing. She crept forward, dagger in hand. If they saw her, she'd have to kill them quietly or risk alarm. Her footsteps made no sound on the damp floor. She peered around the corner. 2 Ironborn guards sat at a small table, sharing a flask. Their weapons, a spear and a sword, were propped within reach. Arya took a steadying breath. She'd hoped the guards might be fewer or asleep. But fate rarely cooperated. She eased back, scanning for another way. A narrow side passage led deeper into the keep. Perhaps it connected to one of the causeways. She knew that the main courtyard was likely well guarded. The side passages might be her best bet. Carefully, she slipped into the side passage, holding her breath. Once out of earshot, she quickened her step. Torchlight was sparse here, the walls were clammy with algae. She forced herself not to flinch at the scuttling of rats. The passage wound upward in a spiral, emerging onto a walkway open to the night sky. Arya's cloak whipped around her as a gust nearly knocked her sideways. She blinked, adjusting to the darkness. Far below, she saw the churning black sea, flecked with moonlit foam. The walkway bridged two towers. If she could reach the outer walls, maybe she could climb down or reach a seaward exit. She pressed on, hugging the wall, wind roaring in her ears. Then footsteps. A silhouette emerged at the opposite end of the walkway, an airborne guard with a lantern. He froze at the sight of her. She cursed under her breath. He opened his mouth to yell, but Arya lunged, closing the distance with the speed of a striking hawk. She slashed at his arm, forcing him to drop the lantern. It shattered, flame sputtering on the wet stones. He tried to raise his axe, but she flicked her wrist and stabbed low, catching him near the hip. He groaned, staggering. She pressed forward, covering his mouth with her free hand, and drove the dagger home. With a muffled gurgle, he sagged. She held him up just enough to lay him quietly on the stones. Panting, she glanced around. No other guards in sight. The wind likely muffled the brief struggle. Stepping over the fallen guard, she continued along the walkway. She found a set of stone steps descending toward what looked like a smaller courtyard near the cliff's edge. Torches burned at intervals, revealing a cluster of sheds or storage buildings. She glimpsed two Ironborn standing near a gate, speaking casually. She scanned the layout, deciding whether she could pass unseen. The shadows near the cliff might conceal her if she dropped onto a lower ledge. She approached carefully, dagger in hand. But then a horn blasted from somewhere else in the keep, short, sharp notes. An alarm. Her heart lurched. Likely the body of the guard had been found, or he'd been missed at a checkpoint. Shouts echoed off the stone walls, and she saw the two men by the gate snap to attention, weapons drawn. Arya flattened herself behind a low wall. So much for a stealthy departure. She had to move fast. She spied a narrow gap between two sheds that led perilously close to the cliff's edge. Maybe from there she could climb down or find a rowboat at the rocky beach below. She darted forward, feet silent on the slick stones. The alarm horn sounded again, louder. She was almost at the gap when one of the guards spotted her, hollering in alert. She sprinted the last steps, ignoring the curses and pounding footsteps behind her. The gap led to a crumbling rampart, half-collapsed into the sea. She saw no easy path down, just broken rocks and swirling waves far below. Turning, she prepared to face the pursuers. 3 Ironborn guards barreled into the gap, axes raised. She had her dagger, but she also carried her sword at her hip. She drew it in a swift motion, the thin Valyrian steel catching the moonlight. The men hesitated, perhaps recognizing the star-like shimmer of the metal. One spat, "Die, wolf bitch." Then they attacked. Arya danced back, feeling the old Bravosi style flow through her limbs. The first man slashed horizontally with his axe. She sidestepped, letting it whistle past, then flicked her sword in a neat arc that opened his throat. He collapsed, choking. The second man roared, thrusting a spear. She twisted her torso, letting it skim by, and slashed across his shoulder, severing tendons. He dropped with a bellow. The third came in from her blind side. She barely pivoted in time, parrying his overhead blow. He was strong, her arm shook under the impact. She let his momentum carry him forward, stepping aside so he stumbled onto the crumbling edge. One well-timed push and he toppled into the yawning darkness, his scream lost in the wind. Her chest heaved. She heard more shouting from the courtyard. No time to linger. She spotted a narrow flight of stairs carved into the cliff, partially hidden by a fallen section of wall. She slid to it, each step treacherously slick with algae. The sea roared below and she clung to the wet stone. Torchlight flickered above as more Ironborn arrived, cursing at the sight of her. Arrows whistled overhead, clattering off the cliff. She descended quickly, half slipping, half jumping the last few steps. The ground leveled into a shelf of rock battered by waves. Salt spray drenched her face. She looked frantically for a boat. Nothing. Just jagged rocks. Up above, a cluster of Ironborn pointed, likely preparing to come down after her. She inched along the shelf, the sea foaming around her ankles. The cold bit through her boots. Another arrow clanged off a rock near her head, sending shards of stone flying. She cursed and pressed flat against the cliff. She couldn't stay here. If they pinned her down, she'd be an easy target. The shelf curved around the cliff face, but who knew if it led to safety or a dead end? She gritted her teeth and moved on, hugging the cliff, letting the waves slam against her legs. At times, the water reached her knees. Icy cold. She nearly lost her footing on the slippery stones. Above, torches glowed, shapes scurrying. She heard them shouting, a clamor of confusion. Maybe they assumed she'd drowned. She forced herself to keep going around a jagged outcrop. The wind shrieked and the ocean's roar drowned all else. Each step was a gamble. She glanced back once, no immediate pursuit. The Ironborn might not dare these treacherous rocks at night. Good. Around the outcrop, the shelf widened slightly. She found a small cove, half-choked with seaweed and driftwood. Her heart soared when she glimpsed a tiny skiff beached on the rocks. Probably used by local fishermen or Ironborn scouts. She stumbled toward it, water sloshing around her legs. It looked battered, but maybe serviceable. She pushed it off the rocks, wincing as her shoulder strained. The tide was rising, swirling around her knees. With a final heave, the skiff floated free, rocking in the surf. Arya clambered in, nearly tipping it. She grabbed the single or stowed inside only one? So it was meant for sculling. She had no choice. She sat, using the oar to shove off from the rocks, then rowed with short, urgent strokes, trying to navigate away from the cliffs. The sea battered her from all sides, the skiff bobbing like a cork. Her arms burned with effort, but she didn't dare stop. At last, she managed to pull away from the immediate danger of the shoreline. The wind threatened to push her back against the cliff. She fought it, adrenaline spiking with every wave. She had no idea where she was going, only that if she could get out of sight, maybe she could circle around to the main harbor or slip out to open sea. She silently cursed the entire situation. This was better than rotting in that tower, but only barely. A shape loomed to her left, a large rock, perhaps, or part of the coastline. She guided the skiff around it. Overhead, the moon slid behind clouds, casting everything into near-total darkness. Salt stung her eyes. She forced her tired muscles to keep rowing. The cove opened onto a broader stretch of water. She glimpsed a faint glow far off, Pike's torches, no doubt. She angled away, seeking deeper waters. If she could just skirt the island's perimeter, maybe there'd be a chance to signal the Sea Lion or any of the crown ships that might be patrolling. Then they could rescue her men or at least carry word back to the king. But the sea had other plans. A large wave crashed into the skiff, nearly capsizing it. She clung to the oar, coughing up salt water, blinking frantically. The next wave slammed in from the opposite side. The boat lurched alarmingly. She realized with terror that the open sea around the Iron Islands was notoriously dangerous, especially at night. The skiff was no match for these swells. A cluster of rocks jutted from the water not far ahead, invisible until the waves foamed around them. She tried to row away, but the current dragged her inexorably. Another wave lifted the skiff, then dropped it with bone-jarring force onto the rocks. The hull splintered. Arya let out a cry as she was thrown sideways. The next wave dragged the wreck off the rocks, water flooding the skiff. She scrambled, chest heaving, trying to keep afloat. The boat was half submerged, the oar gone. Another wave hammered it, and she realized it was sinking fast. Panic rose. If she was sucked under wearing her leathers and boots, she'd drown in seconds. She spotted the jagged rocks again, just a few yards away, glinting like black fangs. Better to cling to them than sink. As the next wave surged, Arya kicked free of the dying skiff and lunged toward the rocks. The swirl of water tugged at her, trying to pull her under, but she planted her feet on a submerged ledge and grabbed a sharp protrusion with both hands. Pain flared, barnacles cut her palms. She ignored it, struggling to haul herself out of the surf. A wave crashed into her back, nearly tearing her grip loose. She clung desperately. The roar filled her ears. At last, she managed to haul herself onto a narrow shelf, water streaming from her clothes. Her lungs burned, heart pounding like a war drum. She coughed, tasting blood or salt or both. She found a relatively flat area of rock, collapsed onto her side, and forced herself to breathe slowly. She was alive. The boat was gone, the sea thrashing it into kindling. She looked around, blinking salt from her eyes. She was perched on a small, wave-lashed rock formation maybe half a mile offshore from Pike. The keep's lights were distant glimmers. She had no path forward but these slick rocks and the stormy sea. In the darkness, it was impossible to see a safe route. She might have to wait here until dawn, hope no Ironborn patrol spotted her. Already, her limbs were shaking from cold. She thought of her mother's voice telling her never to give up, of Ned Stark teaching her perseverance. Gendry's face flashed through her mind. She could almost see his worried frown, telling her to be careful. She swallowed, teeth chattering. With the next wave, icy water splashed over the rock, soaking her again. She realized it would submerge at high tide. She had to climb higher. Gritting her teeth against the sting of cuts on her palms, she inched up the slippery stone, searching for handholds. Another wave crashed, nearly knocking her off, but she managed to cling tight. She pressed on step by step until she reached a small plateau above the constant spray. There she huddled, hugging her knees, dripping and shivering. The wind whipped at her from all sides. The moon emerged from the clouds, revealing the savage grandeur of the sea. She was alone, marooned on a rock outcropping, uncertain if she'd survive till morning. Time passed in a miserable haze of cold, fear, and exhaustion. She tried to keep moving to stave off hypothermia, flexing her fingers and toes, but each wave that sprayed her sapped more heat from her body. She recalled her training in the north, how to endure cold nights. But here she had no cloak, no fire, only soaked leathers. Eventually, her thoughts blurred, a dangerous sign. She forced herself to recite the names of her family, father, mother, Rob, Sansa, Bran, Rickon, John, over and over to stay awake. She also whispered the vow she'd taken as a Kingsguard, though the words seemed faint in the howling wind. Just when she thought she could bear no more, a faint glow appeared on the horizon, the earliest hint of dawn. The seas were still rough, but the tide was receding. In the growing light, she peered around. Off to one side, perhaps a mile away, was another cluster of rocks that led to a larger islet. If she could somehow hop from rock to rock at low tide, she might reach that islet. And from there? Possibly another islet leading eventually to a navigable path around Pike. It was a small hope, but better than nothing. She forced herself upright, ignoring the agony in her muscles. As the light grew stronger, she clambered down the rock toward the connecting ridges. The tide had retreated enough to reveal slippery barnacle-encrusted stones. She tested each step carefully, heart-lurching whenever a wave hissed in. If she slipped, she'd be swept away. Slowly, she made progress, crossing the wet causeway to the next rock cluster. Then the next. The crash of the surf muffled all else. Every so often, she glanced back at Pike's looming silhouette, praying no watchman spotted her ragged form out here. The journey was harrowing, but she pressed on. By midday, the sun peeked through cloud cover. Arya's strength was nearly spent, yet she'd managed to reach a small strip of land on the far side of Pike's rocky perimeter. She discovered a sheltered cove with a narrow beach strewn with driftwood. Her clothes were half-dried by the wind, but her body was battered and she trembled with fatigue. She sank onto the sand, panting. She knew she needed to keep going. There might be Ironborn anywhere, but she had to rest, if only for a few minutes. Suddenly, she heard voices above the cove. She froze, heart leaping. Carefully, she crawled behind a large boulder, hand on her sword hilt. Peering through a gap, she saw a group of men picking their way down a steep path toward the cove. They didn't wear Ironborn garb. In fact, two of them wore the colors of the Crown's warships. Her heart jumped in relief. Were they part of the landing party from the Sea Lion? She listened. One said, "Told you I saw something wash ashore here." Another grumbled about the dangerous rocks. They sounded uneasy but determined. Mustering her strength, Arya staggered out from behind the boulder, raising one hand in a sign of peace. "Wait," she called, voice hoarse. She coughed. "I'm Ser Arya, from King's Landing. I need help." The men startled, drawing swords. But upon seeing her battered state and the white surcoat half visible under her leathers, they gaped. One exclaimed, "Gods, it's truly her." They rushed forward. She collapsed to her knees as they reached her, relief crashing over her. The next hours were a blur. They gave her water, wrapped her in a cloak. She learned they were part of a scouting party from the Sea Lion, which had circled around the island, searching for any sign of her after rumors spread that the Ironborn had taken them hostage. They'd decided to land discreetly to see if they could glean more information, never expecting to find her near dead on a beach. Once her immediate shock subsided, Arya forced herself to focus. "We have men imprisoned in Pike's Tower," she rasped. "Lord Elwood and a dozen soldiers. We can't leave them." The lead sailor, a lanky man with a scar on his forearm, shook his head. "We have only 10 men with us, hidden in the hills. The Sea Lion is anchored further out. We can't take Pike by force." Arya's mind whirred. "We don't have to. We just need to signal the fleet, get enough manpower to force a rescue or a prisoner exchange. Greyjoy won't negotiate otherwise." They conferred among themselves. The men had limited supplies and worried about the Ironborn patrols. But Arya, with fierce urgency, insisted they try. They decided that at dusk they'd slip back to their rowboats, row out to the Sea Lion, and from there gather a larger force or at least deliver word to the king. One man offered to stay behind to watch for Lord Elwood's group from a distance, in case an opportunity arose to sneak them out. Arya wanted to remain too, but she recognized she was in no shape to mount a stealth rescue alone, and she had crucial intelligence Gendry needed. The plan was set. They spent the day hidden among the rocky ridges overlooking the cove. Arya dozed fitfully, haunted by worry for her men. Come dusk, they crept to the rowboats. The sea was calmer, though still far from placid. Arya gritted her teeth and stepped into one of the boats. The men rowed with practiced efficiency, moving quietly away from the island. Her heart pounded as Pike's crags receded into the twilight. Every stroke of the oars took them closer to potential safety, and, she hoped, a chance to save her companions. Out in deeper water, the sea lion loomed, anchored discreetly. The men gave a prearranged signal with a shuttered lantern. A rope ladder was thrown down. Arya climbed it slowly, her body protesting every movement. On deck, a startled watchman cried, "She's alive!" Sailors rushed around them, exclaiming. The officers demanded explanations, crowding Arya. She pushed past them to find the captain, a graying man named Draper. She told him everything, how the parley failed, how Greyjoy refused to stop raiding, how Lord Elwood and the rest were now hostages. Captain Draper swore, pacing. "We have but one ship, not nearly enough to force a rescue. The rest of the fleet is off Fair Isle or near Great Wyke, caught in a standoff. We can't send a raven from here. We'll have to sail back to the Crown's lines." Arya's eyes burned with fatigue, but her mind was clear. "Then let's do it. The king must know. War is coming if we don't act swiftly." Greyjoy spat on every offer of peace. The captain nodded. "We'll sail at first light. Get some rest, Ser Arya." She did, though it was a restless sleep filled with half-formed nightmares of drowning. At dawn, the sea lion's sails unfurled and they set a course away from Pike. The Ironborn might have tried to chase them, but the sea lion held a decent lead and no immediate pursuit was spotted. Arya stood at the stern, watching the silhouette of the Iron Islands vanish into the morning haze. Guilt gnawed at her for leaving the men behind, but she knew staying wouldn't save them. She had to rally help. The voyage to the Crown's muster point near Fair Isle took several days. Arya used the time to regain her strength, though her hands bore healing cuts and her arms ached constantly from the fight against the sea. The sailors treated her with respect, some with awe, having heard the rumors of her swordsmanship. She spent her waking hours strategizing. How might they rescue the hostages? Could the king be persuaded to come himself or send a larger force? Would they attempt a blockade? She was painfully aware that every day they delayed put the men at Pike in greater peril. When at last the Sea Lion reached the muster point, they found a cluster of crown ships under the command of Lord Hollis Byrch, as well as some Lannister vessels. The mood was grim. Byrch himself rode over to the Sea Lion the moment he heard of Arya's arrival. He boarded, demanding a full report. Arya gave it succinctly. Greyjoy refused all terms, took the delegation hostage, threatened open war. Byrch clenched his teeth. "Then we have no choice but to blockade them. We can't let their longships slip away to raid further." Arya eyed the Lannister ships. "Do we have enough to blockade every major Iron Island?" He shook his head. "Not truly. We can threaten them, hamper their movements. But a perfect blockade? Impossible. The king might have to send more ships. The Tullus, the Stormlands. By the time that happens, who knows what the Ironborn will do? Or they might strike at the coasts while our ships are pinned here." She realized with sinking dread that the Ironborn's plan was working. They forced the Crown to spread its forces thin. Meanwhile, any sign of the king's weakness might inspire rebellions elsewhere. Her fists clenched. "We have to rescue Lord Elwood's party. If we fail them, it'll embolden Greyjoy further." Byrch glanced at the deck. "Yes, but a direct assault on Pike is a tall order. We'd need siege weapons, men on the ground. The king must decide. I have no authority for a full invasion." So they agreed. Send a fast ship to King's Landing with Arya aboard to report in person. Let the king weigh the options. Byrch would maintain the blockade as best he could, hoping to limit Ironborn forays. The Lannisters would keep watch. Yet none of it felt sufficient. Arya's chest burned with the need for immediate action, but she had to concede the chain of command. If Gendry decided on war, it would be war. Within a day, Arya boarded the Swiftwind, a swift carrack bound for the capital. The captain promised to make best speed. Arya stood at the prow, braced against the rail, wind in her hair as the western coasts slid by. She yearned to be home to see Gendry face to face, but the memories of Pike and the men left behind clung to her like a cold undertow. The crossing to King's Landing was fraught with storms. The Swiftwind had to take shelter near the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. At last, near dusk on the 10th day after leaving the blockade, they reached the harbor. Arya disembarked, ignoring her exhaustion, and rode straight to the Red Keep. People gawked as she swept past, her hair tangled, her leathers worn by salt and wind, but her eyes alight with fierce purpose. The gates opened for her, the gold cloaks saluting. She rushed through the courtyard, up winding stairs, until she reached the King's Solar. Gendry was there with Ileana, now looking somewhat better, and several counselors. The moment he saw Arya, alive but battered, relief flooded his face. He moved toward her, arms half raised in an aborted gesture as though he wanted to embrace her but remembered himself. Arya, he breathed, scanning her appearance. Gods, I feared the worst. She sank to one knee briefly, then stood. Your Grace, the Ironborn have refused parley. They hold our men prisoner, including Lord Elwood. They will not cease raiding unless forced. We must act. The council erupted in chatter, but Gendry silenced them, guiding Arya to a seat. Tell me everything, he said quietly. She recounted every detail. Harlaw's threats, Greyjoy's defiance, the attempt to escape, her harrowing ordeal at sea, how she finally made it to the blockade. Ileana listened, eyes wide, a hand resting protectively on her abdomen. Gendry's face darkened with anger. So they spat on our offer of peace. They want war? Then war they shall have. But your Grace, Ileana interjected softly, are we prepared for a drawn-out naval campaign? The realm is still recovering. He turned to her, jaw set. We can't allow them to terrorize us. My father let them rebel once, and House Greyjoy paid dearly. They seem to have forgotten that lesson. We'll remind them. The Master of Whispers, Ryam Hill, ventured we might try a smaller, precise strike, rescue the hostages, decapitate the leadership. Could we dispatch a specialized force? Arya thought of sneaking into Pike. The fortress was near impenetrable. But maybe with careful planning. She said it won't be easy. Yet if we wait for a full-scale invasion, the men at Pike could be executed. We can't let that happen. Gendry considered. We'll do both. Raise the fleet, blockade the islands, and mount a rescue if we can. Ser Arya, you'll help plan it. I'm not losing more loyal men to Greyjoy's arrogance. Ileana shifted, looking distressed, but she did not argue. The realm was bigger than her caution now. Gendry barked orders to the council, demanding ravens be sent to every corner of the realm for ships and men. War was indeed at their doorstep. Arya watched him, heart clenching. She thought of her vow to protect him, to protect his future child from the horrors of war. Yet here they were, on the precipice of another bloody conflict. In the days that followed, King's Landing bustled with war preparations. The city's shipyards rang with the sound of hammers forging nails, repairing hulls. Soldiers drilled in the yard. Lords and knights arrived daily, pledging swords or seeking favor. Arya immersed herself in the planning, conferring with naval officers, gleaning every detail she could about Pike's defenses. She also took time to regain her strength, letting Maester Larys tend to her injuries and exhaustion. He scolded her for pushing too hard, but she brushed him off. Meanwhile, Ileana remained on bed rest. Gendry often visited her, then returned to the war room, grim-faced. Arya saw him wearing that haunted look again, the weight of the crown crushing him. Once she caught him in a hallway at twilight. He turned to her, his eyes tired but resolute. I can't let the Ironborn humiliate us, Arya. They'll see it as an invitation for every other lord to challenge my reign. She nodded. I know. We'll strike decisively. He rubbed his brow. I should lead the fleet myself, but the queen, Stay with her, Arya said gently. You have an heir on the way and the realm needs you here in the capital. I'll sail with the next wave of ships. I'll see it done. Gendry reached out, clasping her forearm in a gesture of trust. Thank you. Just come back alive. Please. Her heart squeezed. I will. Soon enough, she boarded another ship, this time with a substantial force. Dozens of war galleys flew the Stag Banner, joined by smaller contingents from the Westerlands, the Vale, even a few from the Reach. Their plan: converge on the Iron Islands, surround Pike, then coordinate a rescue attempt for the hostages. If Greyjoy resisted, they'd assault. It was a gamble, but the alternative was letting the Ironborn run rampant. Arya stood on the forecastle of the galley Stormchaser, surveying the mustering fleet in Blackwater Bay. Seagulls wheeled overhead. She prayed to the old gods that they could end this quickly, spare innocent lives. But deep down, she knew the Ironborn wouldn't capitulate easily. War and death were on the horizon. a fresh storm that she would walk into with eyes open. As the storm chaser's sails caught the wind, propelling them west, she tightened her grip on the rail. She thought of the king, of Ilyana in bed, of the unborn child whose future might be shaped by the outcome of this campaign. She'd never wanted to be part of shaping realms. Yet here she was, one of the king's indispensable swords. If it meant fewer tragedies like the ones she'd witnessed in her own life, she would endure. So she steeled herself and watched the coastline slip away, preparing for what might be the fiercest test of her vow yet. Night fell over the sea, the sails creaking as the wind whipped through them. Below decks, soldiers sang to keep their spirits high. Arya stood alone at the bow, recalling the vow she'd repeated so many times, to protect the king and his realm with her life. Now, once again, she would do whatever it took, whether by steel or stealth, to end the threat of the Ironborn. In the darkness, she lifted her eyes to the sky, where a scattering of stars flickered. Perhaps the spirits of her father and mother watched. She whispered a quiet promise to them, to Gendry, to everyone counting on her. "I will not fail."